nog lärt mig det. Och sen så kanske i min personlighet inte And today we focus on finance. We're broadcasting every day here, and my name is Katarina Rolfsdotter Jansson, and I am the host, together with Nick Nuttall, who used to be the communications director at the COP in Paris. So Nick, tell us a little bit about this week's broadcast, please.
Yes, we're absolutely focusing on those companies, those organizations, those people who are actually trying to halve their emissions by 2030 and get this world on track to actually deliver the Paris Agreement, a net zero world by 2050.
And today, as we focus on finance, it's been a focus on finance all day here at the COP. And some news for what happened today is, for instance, the financial network Glasgow Financial Alliance presented its interim report that the network today brings together 450 financiers from 45 countries who together manage $100 trillion US. And the money will now be diverted into investments that are in line with the 1.5 target. And during the day, the UN initiative, the Race to Zero, also presented its conclusions on how much funding climate change will require until 2050. And also today, the Global Resilience Index was launched, an index that will help insurance companies measure and compare resilience to climate change in countries, companies, and also in supply chains. So Nick, let's now introduce Anita Soine.
Let's do it.
Yes. Anita is our Green Zone reporter, and she's from Kenya. And every day Anita is rounded about outside of the diplomatic zone and sort of gathers information for us to be presented here. So Anita, what have you picked up for us today?
Today I have learned that the Africa Development Bank is funding the Great Green Wall together with the World Bank, which is going to give about $5 billion US for the Great Green Wall. I also learned that the Nigerian government is planning to plant a specific type of cactus that will help in cutting carbon emissions. And also, I was able to interact with few activists from different countries, especially in Africa, who are demanding banks to stop funding fossil fuels.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Anita. Are you enjoying yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Great. We'll see you back here again tomorrow.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So Nick, please give us an update on what happened so far at the COP.
Yeah, well, I mean, just referring to the finance thing that you mentioned, I mean, for those that have been round the block on this issue of finance for many years, when you hear another 100 and it's so many hundred trillions and things like that, you think about what Lord Stern told us in the April show, which was 150 organizations with $150 trillion worth of assets under management. I mean, they're eye-watering sums, and they always seem to pop up at COPs. I'd just like to see, like, where is the money being spent? I would like to look out and say, oh, I can see it flowing there, and I can see it flowing here. These eye-watering sums need to be committed rather than as just celebrating yet another pledge, and I think that's very important. I mean, Mark Carney said, the former governor of the Bank of England here at the COP, that there's more than enough money out there to get us to net zero, but we need to get it spent and invested, and that's absolutely critical. Yeah.
And Nick, about this counter, speaking of numbers.
Yeah, well, you know, the IMF came out with this number of how much fossil fuel subsidies are being spent. And this is a clock that shows you how much money has been spent on fossil fuel subsidies since the beginning of the COP.
It's mind-boggling.
And it's eye-watering. And you know, people are arguing about whether there's $100 billion for the developing countries, and there's $54 billion being spent on that. And a lot of that's also developed countries too, so let's imagine it's just Nigeria or something.
Well, let's look at the video. We don't have time video now to see what we're all about here, pushing for change.
film of the series, we will look at food production and nature-based solutions. Improvement from these sectors can lead to a significant reduction of the world's total greenhouse gas emissions, at the same time as it enables richer harvests and food that contains more nutrition. It would also lead to boosted ecosystem services such as better groundwater and prevention of droughts, bushfires, and flooding. It's a win-win situation. We will look at some examples of how to do it. Today, the world emits around 55 gigatons of greenhouse gases. Food production accounts for almost 1/4 of these emissions. Food production is also threatening biodiversity and crucial ecosystems important for the stability of the entire Earth system. In fact, food production is threatening food supply itself. As much as around 65% of the emissions from the food sector are coming from the meat industry. The practice of growing crops such as soya to feed the cattle demand huge amounts of farmlands, and sometimes forests and even natural and rainforests are cut down to grow the crops for the livestock. This is a waste of natural resources and carbon sequestering systems that we today definitely cannot afford. If the cattle would eat grass, which is their natural diet, we could spare a lot of farmlands and carbon sequestering ecosystems. In addition, the grasslands and pastures themselves would function as carbon sinks and also preserve biodiversity. Governments should support the whole process of the meat production, making it more sustainable, resource effective, and climate friendly.
If we are going to feed humanity on current lands that we call grazing lands, it's going to have to come at a reduction in meat consumption globally.
When it comes to agriculture, we could also reduce a lot of carbon emissions at the same time as we secure the source of food itself, the soil. Soils are thousands of years old, and they are the prerequisite of almost everything living on land, yet we are depleting the soils. Overusing of fertilizers, as well as monoculture growing and too much tilling in the long run, stop the soil from creating nutrition. Nutrition that we all, plants, animals, and humans, depend on. We see it all over the world today. Soils are dying. But if using less or no fertilizers, and instead using crop rotation and leaving unused parts of the crops on the field, and by using less or no tilling systems, the soils can stay alive and healthy, at the same time as we avoid a lot of carbon emissions and also enable the soil to store carbon. Using crop rotation also decontaminates between different crops, and less or no pesticides could be used. Pesticides are contributing to the extinction of pollinators on which 75% of our agricultural crops depend. If governments support reforms and change of practices, food production can halve their emissions already by 2030, at the same time as the soils and the harvests become richer and deliver more nutrition to people. The single greatest solution of all for absorbing carbon from the atmosphere is preserving and replanting forests. Recent research shows that the impact the forests have on the climate, as well as on the whole Earth system, is even bigger than we knew before. As well as sequestering huge amount of carbons, the forests have a cooling effect themselves and can decrease temperature by several degrees. Furthermore, they create rainfall, preventing erosion and earth flows, and they play a main role in the life-creating system of soil, microbes, fungus, pollinators, and other animals that supply our food. Most important of all forests are the natural forests. Only a few % of the planet's natural forests remain, which is bad for growth and security for life on Earth.
You're not airing the right one right after, are you?
There's not many of them left, and I think we need to hold on to every single last one of these areas that we have.
Another thing that we had not really realised before is what an important role wetlands play. Wetlands secure groundwater, clean drinking water, prevent drought, bushfires and flooding, and sequester a tremendous amount of carbon. As much as 90% of the planet's wetlands, though, have been drained. Drained wetlands are constantly leaking huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. In some nations, 1/5 of the nation's total emissions come from drained wetlands. The good thing is that many of the drained wetlands do not work very well for agriculture and can quite easily be restored with a considerable amount of emission reduced. Food production, forestry and land use have the potential to go from being a large part of the climate change and biodiversity loss problem to being one of the most important solutions. If sufficient measures are made fast enough by governments, half of the emissions from these sectors can be reduced by 2030, and much more during the following decades.
Well, this is a very strong documentary, right, Nick? But not the one we intended to air.
Not the one we intended to air, but I think we have to remember that we have to invest in nature-based solutions as well, so it was a good reminder. There had been a rather excellent film about finance. Let's not worry, let's press on.
So we might be able to slide the finance documentary in later on during the broadcast. We call this the COP Backdoor, and we also have with us connecting with hubs in Nairobi, in Stockholm and also in Washington, D.C. So let's see now if we could connect with our hub in Kenya, where we have our hub at Mount Kenya University. And with us there as a moderator, we have Dr. Robert Ndunge Josephine. So let's see if we can connect over to Kenya and say hello to Robert. Here you go. Hi, Robert. How are you there over in Mount Kenya University? Lovely to see you. I'm going to put my headphones on.
Connection's a bit weak.
Yes, it's a bit of a weak connection, but now we know we have you with us, and we'll connect back in a little bit, so we could talk more. So good to see you, Robert, and stay with us, and we'll connect more and get some input from your side. And let's now go to Stockholm. Let's see if we can connect with Stockholm. Hello, Sarah Shaban. How are you today in Stockholm?
It may well be that they can hear them on this show.
I'll just go on. So we've been calling from Stockholm, and we are very much looking forward to this further broadcast tonight on finance. We're looking forward to learning even more new exciting terms here and to see if money can make
Let's pretend that we can hear them.
greener tonight. So thank you, and see you later.
Thank you, Sarah. Let's now go to our correspondent in Washington, D.C., Sweta Chakraborty.
Yes, hello. We are thrilled to move into day 3 of our broadcast for...
Hello there, great to see you.
And we're really excited to see all of the content around finance today. We are especially intrigued by what's happening at COP26 because right now the Build Back Better agenda is making its way through Congress here in Washington. And there is a lot of buzz that's been created by President Joe Biden's announcement yesterday at COP26 that there would be a methane standard, which would create a standard for methane leakage in the oil and gas life cycle. So that is something that is really monumental for the US. That is something we haven't seen here before. Also, we are seeing a $3 billion annual commitment from the US for contributing to vulnerable countries being able to adapt and become more resilient in the face of the warming planet and the impacts of climate change. And so with what's going on in COP26 and Biden's announcements, there's more excitement here in Washington than ever to pass this Build Back Better agenda. That's going to be what we're keeping our eyes on here in Washington, D.C., simultaneously while all of this important discussion is ongoing at COP. and as we learn about finance today. So really thrilled to join in the broadcast today and can't wait to take some questions from our live Washington hub as well for you all.
Excellent, Shruta. Wonderful. And we talk today, as we do on all the other broadcasts, we talk about disruptors, transformers, and also behavioral change.
Recording stopped.
And now you will take over from here and introduce the first keynote speaker on the theme of disruptors.
Exactly.
Excellent.
So thank you very much indeed, Katerina. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome to the stage here in Glasgow, Helen Mountford, Vice President for Climate and Economics at the World Resources Institute. The WRI's climate team helps policymakers, businesses and civil society around the world to identify and advance the deep structural shifts needed to address climate change. Helen, I think many people know as well, as pivotal in the work of the new climate economy, and previously worked as Deputy Director of Environment for the OECD, advising governments on green fiscal policy reforms, climate change finance and economics, green growth, and the list goes on. Absolutely. So over to you. You have the floor, Helen. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, and it's wonderful to be with you all today. What I want to do is give a little bit of an update on where we stand now on finance, on climate finance, after this day of finance here at COP, and also the last 2 days of the World Leaders Summit. So there's been some important progress, but there's also a lot of gaps that still need to be filled, and areas where we really need to see finance starting to be delivered and action happening on the ground. Let me start briefly with the $100 billion, the really important $100 billion per year, which rich countries committed to mobilize for developing countries each year from 2020, and then they missed that target. So first, let me clarify, of course, this is just a drop in the ocean compared to the trillions that we actually need to mobilize and shift to really deliver not just a low-carbon green economy, but actually the adaptation and the resilience, and to take care of those who are most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, whose lives and livelihoods, communities we see destroyed each year. So it's a drop in the ocean, but it's an important and really symbolic amount. It's really critical for building trust. It's a commitment that was made and needs to be delivered. Now, unfortunately, as many will have seen, it was not delivered in time. We actually have an OECD report which shows that in 2019, rich countries fell about $20 billion short of delivering the full $100 billion, and probably again in 2020 and 2021. And there's now an action plan, a delivery plan on how to deliver it by 2023 and then make up the shortfall. But we need to do more. And one thing, as we look at these numbers on fossil fuel subsidies, one thing that's important to recall is that even though 2020 was such a hard year for so many, at the same time we actually had, in countries around the world, we had about $350 billion of direct subsidies and tax expenditures, tax breaks given to fossil fuels. The numbers here, the much larger numbers, also include all the costs of non-internalized fossil fuels in terms of non-internalized fossil fuel costs in terms of air pollution, et cetera, but just direct government expenditures or tax breaks amounted to $350 billion. So there was the money there. Unfortunately, it was not allocated to actually cover the amount we needed on the $100 billion. But now we need to go forward from that. And Mia Mottley, who's the absolutely fabulous Prime Minister of Barbados, made a great speech on Monday. If you haven't seen it, look it up. She was fantastic. And she really challenged leaders here to come forward and fill 3 key gaps. One, the gap to actually keep global emissions below the level which will enable us to stay under global warming of 1.5 degrees Celsius. Second, to fill that financing gap towards the $100 billion and then go beyond. And then third, to make sure we were giving much more on adaptation. And since then, the last couple of days, a number of governments and other leaders have actually stepped up. So we've seen governments from Spain and Switzerland, Italy, US, Canada, Japan, Ireland, Norway have come forward and provided some additional funding, and importantly to either the adaptation fund or to other adaptation actions. This followed others such as Germany or Denmark, who's given 60% of their finance they're going to allocate to adaptation, Sweden, Netherlands, others. But we need to still keep going. One of the exciting examples we've seen where we're actually going to really see how finance can transform action on the ground is South Africa. South Africa came forward recently with a very ambitious climate target to 2030. And then what's happened yesterday is we got a number of funders who grouped together with them as part of a South African funder initiative. It's an energy transition partnership, a just energy transition partnership, where they're going to come behind South Africa with $8.5 billion in funds over the next 3 to 5 years to really help South Africa deliver on the ambition that they have in their 2030 target, and to ensure this is done in a way which is just and helps support communities and workers as they do the transition. So that's one of the examples I think Nick was asking for. How can we see this transforming, not just the big numbers on finance, but actually transforming things on the ground? One other really exciting, although small but important, finance commitment I want to highlight, and I'm particularly proud to do this as I'm half Scottish, is from Scotland. Scotland came forward, the Scottish government announced on Monday that it will provide £1 million to actually support developing countries to manage the losses and damages of climate change as they go forward. So these are the impacts of climate change which they can't adapt to. They can't build resilience to. It's where you have dislocation or you have community losses of lives. And again, there's going to need to be much more money than this on the table, but it's a really important first gesture showing how important it is to address loss and damages, and that the Scottish government recognizes that they have a responsibility, as do other countries in the north, to actually step up and help support developing countries on this. So the next steps here in terms of the public finance and the negotiations, what we're going to see unpack over the next couple weeks is really a strong focus on how to ensure the delivery of the public finance, but also much more on adaptation, ensuring that there's access, and then looking at how we deliver the next. What is the process to the next global finance goal for post-2025? Now let me say a few things on finance in terms of what's happening outside the negotiations, the private finance sector. We've really seen a dramatic shift here in the last 2 years. The finance sector has been waking up, slowly and late, but waking up to the very real financial risks of continuing to invest in a high carbon, polluting and damaging old economy, and also realizing the opportunities of investing in a green, competitive and more dynamic economy. So again, they've come late to the game, but they're coming, and they're coming big. So far we've got over 100 major banks and insurers that have, and asset managers and owners that have announced that they will divest from fossil fuels in terms of all of their assets and what they're investing. We've also got, as Nick mentioned before, and Katriana, we have a remarkable development, and as of today, this Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, otherwise known as GFANZ, has over 450 asset owners, asset managers, and banks that have committed $130 trillion to a net zero pathway. So basically, by 2050, all of their assets, all of their portfolio will be aligned with what's needed, according to the science, for net zero. Now that's fantastic, but the real question is, how do you implement it? How do you make sure that actually happens? How do they chart these pathways? And the good news is we're seeing here as well some of the tools and approaches that can help. So in GFANZ, in this initiative, they've committed that they will use science-based guidelines to reach net zero, that they will cover all emission scopes, that they will include 2030 interim targets, and will commit to transparent reporting and accounting, which allows civil society, it allows governments, it allows all of us to hold them to account to actually deliver this. It's as much about the quality and the actual delivery of this finance and the finance flows. That's even more important than even the top numbers. Top numbers are exciting and important, but we need to ensure that we've got the processes in place. So really exciting momentum and starting to move. Another announcement that came today builds on this, and basically the City of London is now taking the next step and making this mandatory for all of their finance institutions in the City of London, that they will go towards a net zero pathway. So things are moving. Now, it's essential that we have these clear trajectories and these intermediate targets to allow them to do so, and this will be a big focus of the initiative. But there's a lot that they can build on as well. So let me just mention one, which is from the Science Based Targets Initiative. Now, this initiative is already helping over 2,000 major companies, about a quarter of global Fortune 500 companies, to actually set targets based on the science and then follow trajectories and account for those as they're going forward. So actually delivering the action on the ground that we need. This is so critical to ensure that we avoid greenwashing. Now, the Science Based Targets Initiative last week launched a new guidance on net zero standards for corporates. That is the gold standard for what corporates who say they're going net zero need to adhere to, and have already been consulting over 2 years to develop this, pilot testing it, wide open public consultation, and have already actually had 3 corporations which have now met the criteria and been validated. So we're starting to move that forward. Now, next step is to really translate this into the finance sector. And what does it mean for the finance sector? There's guidance that started the process of consultation and developing this, and to provide the guidance and alignment that the financial institutions need to have these robust net zero targets and actually deliver against them is now coming forward. So we've got the tools coming forward, the approaches coming forward to help the finance sector on this transition. Again, the finance sector is coming late to the game in many ways. The finance commitments are late, certainly, but they are coming. And now we need to ensure they're robust, rigorous, and actually deliver access and finance on the ground. That is the priority. Beyond that, we need to ensure that we stop the incoherent policies that conflict, such as the fossil fuel subsidies. The finance is there, the time is now, we can do it, and we need to start now. So Nick, over to you.
Helen, that was really fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. And absolutely fascinating that the government of Scotland actually put $1 million into loss and damage, because we know how politically charged that topic's been. So yeah, who knows what will come from that? Maybe it'd be Wales next and Northern Ireland. No, that's really very interesting indeed. Thank you very much, Helen, for being with us. If you'd like to leave the stage now, and we may get some questions from Nairobi just after some of these presentations. If you had a chance just to stay and answer those, that would be great. I have a great pleasure in introducing Kingsmill Bond, energy strategist at Carbon Tracker Initiative. He believes that the energy transition is the most important driver of financial markets and geopolitics in the modern era. And Kingsmill has worked as a sell-side city equity analyst and strategist for 25 years, including for Deutsche Bank, Cyberbank and Citibank in London, Hong Kong and Moscow. At Carbon Tracker, he's written about the impact of the energy transition on financial markets, domestic politics and geopolitics, and authored a series of reports on the myths of the energy transition. And of course, one of the reasons we asked the Carbon Tracker on the show tonight, and you in particular, was also to reflect a little bit on this whole business of the fossil fuel subsidies, which we are following here right now.
Rising and rising.
Rising and rising, exactly.
Fine, well, thank you very much. I'm here just briefly to touch upon this topic, and as Helen very correctly pointed out, it is totally incoherent. We have a climate crisis and we're still subsidizing the industry which is causing the crisis. I mean, it's completely dumb. I'm a finance guy, it makes no sense whatsoever. So I've been asked briefly to lay out the facts of the case. There's a very brilliant report that Ian Parry and his team does every year at the IMF, and they tot up the amount of subsidies that are paid to the fossil fuel sector. So basically it's about $500 billion a year of what they call explicit subsidies. That is to say, you pay less for your petrol than it costs you. It costs the government to buy it for you. That's an explicit subsidy, and then what they call the implicit subsidies, which is about $5 or $6 $1,000 billion a year, which is the cost of local healthcare. That's the 8 million people a year dying of fossil fuel related diseases such as cancer and heart failure and so on. And furthermore, the global warming costs, which they calculate, the fires and floods and all the many disastrous consequences of global warming. Anyway, they add it all up, it adds up to about $5 or $6 trillion. So you have an enormous sum. It's about 7% of global GDP from their numbers. The first point to be made about this number is that it's simply not just, because it's not just because the costs are borne by the poor and the benefits are taken by the rich. The costs are borne by the people in the global south and the benefits taken by the people in the global north. The costs are borne by future generations and the benefits taken by current generations. But it's even worse than that, because in fact, it's the wealthy who use the fossil fuels. Famously, the top 10% of the world use 50% of the energy, and the bottom 50% of the world use just 13%. So it's a completely unjust subsidy to the fossil fuel system, taken from the backs of the labouring poor and future generations. And furthermore, and even more scarily, the IMF has been making this point for many years, and our great leaders have been talking about how they're going to end subsidies, and they just don't. So this is what brings us now to COP in 2021. I think it's quite an exciting moment, because we have, as Helen just pointed out, all this money now coming in to try and tackle the problem. And one of the main things to do when you're tackling a problem is to end the subsidies to the current system. And I think the explicit subsidies are the most vulnerable, and they will come first. Which then brings me to a very interesting piece that Achim Steiner and his team have just written at the UN on the solutions. How do you remove subsidies? How do you avoid the Gilets jaunes problem in France? And they've analyzed this across 5 or 6 countries, and they basically say, look, the way to do it, they've got 4 solutions, and I'll quickly summarize them. You understand the nature of the problem. Why were these subsidies put into place in the first place? Very often, many decades ago, and for very good reasons, but they're no longer valid. You understand first, then you plan a sequence of changes. The third thing you do is you make it just. You redistribute the money that you are saving by no longer subsidizing fossil fuels. You redistribute that money to those at the bottom end of the income spectrum, so it becomes a just shift. And then finally you sell it. And this is one of the mistakes that Macron made. It wasn't properly sold to the people. You sell it as part of a package of broader measures, and you make sure it's perceived and seen to be just. So there are very clear solutions to the removal of the explicit subsidies that the IMF is talking about. And then let's think for a moment about the benefits of the removal of these subsidies. And there are many benefits, but the IMF has quantified them as you would expect. First of all, you have a 36% fall in their calculations in emissions as a result of the sensible removal of these subsidies, and it puts you on track for hitting Paris. Secondly, from their calculations, you save 0.9 million lives a year. In fact, the IEA has a bigger number than that, but 0.9 million lives a year. And then thirdly, you have the capacity to raise really substantial sums in carbon taxation, up to $4 trillion a year, which you can deploy again to make this a more just transition. So I think, just by way of conclusion, the key point for the fossil fuel sector is that it is operating, as it were, over the edge of the cliff. It's already getting from society subsidies to the tune of $5 or $6 trillion a year. And watch out, society is now woken up. As those subsidies start to get removed, and those subsidies, to be clear, are higher than the entire profits of the fossil fuel sector, you will see a major reallocation of capital. And this, I guess, is my final point. Investors can see the writing on the wall. They're already taking their money out of these moribund, unsustainable sectors, and they're reallocating it to the new growth sectors of renewables. And that, in and of itself, will drive faster change. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Kingsmill. And as we were saying the other day, you can understand a bit of government support for a startup, that's going to do something interesting for the economy. But fossil fuels have been around for donkey's years. I mean, they're hardly startups, are they? So
I mean, and again, the problem is a lot of this stuff was put in place, as I said, decades ago.
Yeah.
When we didn't realize the damage that it was causing, and it was in response to particular interest groups who were powerful at the time. And then these policies, they just never die.
Yeah.
And we've just got to take a stand back and think about what it's doing, who's really benefiting and who's losing.
Yeah.
And in the great fight against climate change, it's a really obvious solution to remove fossil fuel subsidies. And again, make it fair. Take that money, redistribute it to poorer households, target it. We've got new technologies called digital wallets. We can target the money directly to poorer people, not to the rich who drive the bigger cars.
Yeah, SUV drivers in many parts of the world, both rich and poor. Yeah.
Anyway.
Fantastic. That was really super, Kingsmill. If you could just join Helen down there in the audience, we may get some questions from my Nairobi hub. I hug as well. We can have hug and hub. I'd now like to invite Ingmar Rentzhog, the founder and CEO of We Don't Have Time, to talk a little bit about this very topic.
The other day, my dog, Dave Roberts or somebody. Who was it?
Okay, great. Thank you. Dave Roberts. Yeah. He's a good guy, actually. Very good.
Sorry?
I do the whole new.
Okay. Yes, this topic is close to my heart. And we could have those climate meetings forever. But if we don't stop the subsidies, we will never achieve result. A big talking point on this meeting is the climate fund pledge, $100 billion. They have a hard time to agree on that money, who is going to finance it and how.
Yeah.
But $100 billion, that is what we are going to count up the fossil fuel subsidies before the end of this meeting. So this is the problem, and the emperor is naked when we disclose these numbers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
What we would like to do, and why I have a toy with me on stage, is that United Nations Development Program, they have made an incredible movie where a dinosaur enters the UN headquarters and tell the people that we need to stop or we will go extinct as them. So I think we should play that movie.
Yeah, we'd love to play that UNDP movie. Yeah.
Thank you.
You okay? You need a minute? Cool. Okay. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
Super. Super, it's a great campaign, and you can download that in, I can't remember how many languages, 65, something like that. Even languages like Swahili, which are often not official languages of the UN, of course. So download it and share it, and let's make this problem history, as Ingvar pointed out. We'd like to just go to our hub in Nairobi. First here right now, if we have Nairobi, could you come in, please? It would be lovely to hear from you and see if you have any questions to our two speakers. Hello, Nairobi.
Hello, Nick.
Hello.
Hi. Finally, we've been able to reconnect with you. We are here at Mount Kenya University, and we're very glad to have joined for the third day. So today we also had a moment to discuss a little bit about financing in context of climate change, and how then we'll be able to think about innovations and looking for solutions to climate change and carbon emissions. So when we had our discussions and what seems to have come up is there was a lot of questions in around financing. A lot of people wondering how fair the allocation for green financing to the developing countries is, and what criteria is used to determine which country deserves to be given what amount. But also there was a concern, and I've had it coming also being raised by King's Bill Bond, of the fact that whereas the Global South, we do not contribute as much carbon footprint, we tend to be at the biggest burden of the impacts of climate change and global warming. And the question is whether even the 100 billion per year that has been the commitment from the Paris Accord since 2009, whether that is really enough, and whether it's something that needs to be evaluated and perhaps reviewed for the global south. So, but also there was also questions of whether there is any efforts by the global community to ensure that the green financing and green bond is able to go down to the communities on the grassroots, so that they are able to benefit even the people on the grassroots. So those are some of the questions and concerns that have come up so far, and we'll be glad to hear from the panelists and the speakers maybe what comments and
Guys,
so over to you.
Yeah, thank you, guys. That was a bit of a marathon series of questions, but you got them in. Thank you very much. Helen, maybe just try and deal with one or two.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. I will, and I'll try and be brief about this. Okay, so first of all, the 100 billion, the one thing we can say for sure is it's absolutely not enough. This is not enough. It is more, it's a question of trust, and it's a question of getting started and moving some of the financing we need to support developing countries. But certainly there's a lot more needed, and there is a process that is starting here where we're going to be basically agreeing, countries will be agreeing to set up the process and how to actually come to a new finance number from 2025 onwards. Between now and 2025, there's meant to be 100 billion at least delivered per year, making up for the shortfalls in the years where countries have missed it. But then beyond that, yes, absolutely going towards something that's bigger. And, you know, as Kingsmill said, as we've said, it's actually, in any case, we need much beyond that. And it's really about the trillions and how to shift the trillions in the economy. The other question I want to briefly address was this question of, is there a fair distribution of finance to countries? And the answer on that, unfortunately, is also probably no. You know, there's not. And it's not that there's actually any top-down decision of how much finance any individual country gets in terms of climate finance. It's actually much more organic than that. There will be different countries or institutions, you know, the African Development Bank, the World Bank, bilateral donors, and each of them will come to a given country and be talking to them and saying, okay, what is it you're planning to do on climate? What do you need? Let's see if we can fill some of those gaps. So it sort of builds up together through these pieces. And I think one of the things we're looking at, which I mentioned South Africa, and one of the reasons South Africa really excites me at the moment is South Africa has a very comprehensive plan set up through this climate commission that the president pulled together. And they've said, this is our plan. This is how we're going to do a just and equitable transition in South Africa to net zero. And then after South Africa said that, the funders came and said, okay, how can we help you do that? So South Africa has its plans, the funders then come and then work it out.
Thanks so much indeed, Helen. Thank you for being on our show, and thanks very much for those questions from Nairobi. Okay, we're now going to the next part of the show, which is transformers. People, individual organizations that are transforming the economy. We know that achieving the Paris Agreement requires a transformation in all sectors of society. Businesses have no choice if they want to stay in the game. So we're going to meet some of the players who lead the way through the bold climate action in the area of sustainable, climate-friendly finance. Thanks very much indeed, guys. Good film. So now we're going to go to our first speaker, who is going to give a keynote of 5 minutes, and then we're going to go to a panel discussion with various people from around the world, some of whom are also in Glasgow. So I wonder if you could connect us with Carl Melander. He's the Senior Vice President and CFO of Ericsson. Carl, very nice to see you. He's been the CFO of Ericsson since April 2017. He's the owner of Ericsson's target to be a carbon neutral in its operations by 2030 and responsible for the company's work to reduce business travel carbon emissions. Carl Melander has held various positions in finance and business throughout his career in Ericsson, including group treasurer and head of finance in several regions. I could go on. He's worked for the Swedish Government International Development Financing Agency and so many other things. Carl, you have the floor. Let's hear your 5-minute keynote. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. I hope you can hear me well. It's really a great honor to be back here tonight. And I wanted to speak about the evolving connection now between sustainability and financial performance in a corporate setting then, but also this important dynamic between companies and the investor community for driving climate action. And for us at Ericsson, and this goes for all corporates or all companies, of course, our stakeholders expect us to step up and take a leadership role here on climate action. And of course, they have good reason to expect that, because without strong action to mitigate climate risk, I mean, we will continue to see the impact of rising temperatures on societies around the globe. But their reasons also include financial value. Companies need now to understand how their business models and their operations can evolve to fit in a low carbon economy, and what the journey to net zero could look like. I think forward-leaning players have recognized for a long time that sustainable business is also business that will generate higher returns in the long run. And this certainly includes ourselves at Ericsson. We have a long and, if I dare say, a proud history within sustainability. And our approach is a holistic one, starting with what we can do to reduce our own carbon footprint, but also how we can help our customers reduce their impact, and how then collectively we can help society reduce emissions through the deployment of technology or ICT solutions. So we start, as I mentioned, we start with our own operations, and here we incorporate sustainability throughout our own operations to meet the 1.5 degree aligned climate targets. And our target is to have net zero emissions in our own operations by 2030. To further underline the importance of this, we also recently signed a $2 billion revolving credit facility with pricing linked to 2 of our sustainability targets. That of becoming carbon neutral by 2030. As well as our target of having 350 high emitting and strategic suppliers set their own climate targets. So we're willing to take that on and that will determine the pricing of this financing for us. As a CFO in our company, I believe that achieving the climate targets really goes hand in hand with our business and financial performance, and we will only achieve long-term financial success if we're able to meet our climate ambitions as well. And the key here, I believe, and this is what we see on experience, is that we put at least the same amount of determination behind actions to achieve the climate targets as we do for the typical financial targets in the business. I would say the link for us between sustainability and financial value is probably most apparent in the work we do with energy efficiency of our products as we're building out 5G networks across the globe. And for our customers, which are the network operators here, the energy use remains one of the absolutely biggest overall costs, totaling some $25 billion annually. And this is why our continued investment into research and development continues to have such a strong focus on energy improvements of the 5G networks and our products. And we talk about breaking the energy curve with our product portfolio. And of course, this work also has a directly positive impact on our customers' P&L, which reinforces further. But I would say this is not altruism. Of course, sustainability is and will remain an integral part of our strategy. And we are here to create value for the future. And we are convinced that the long-term success of us as a company in our sector, our customers, is really intimately linked to achieving the stringent environmental targets as well. Now, I think, and we see it today in COP26, it's really encouraging to see that the financial markets are playing an increasingly active role here in driving this agenda through engaging with companies such as us on topics around the climate change. And now, and these numbers have been quoted, I'm sure, by several before me, but the number of signatories now of the UN Principles for Responsible Investments is approaching 4,000, I learned. And today at COP26, it was announced that over 450 financial institutions from 45 countries and with $130 trillion in assets have now committed to a net zero target in the Glasgow Financial Alliance. And furthermore, ESG funds are also on the rise, of course. I think in for a record year, raking in over $21 billion only in the first quarter this year. So all of this creates a new landscape for business to operate in. And now I'm going to close here and really say that I'm very thrilled now to be hosting a panel discussion here tonight to discuss these topics further with the dynamics between investors and companies. I'm a firm believer in the potential of technology, of course, to tackle these issues, but also a believer in the financial markets to be the catalyst for positive change. And so by keeping this dialogue open and learning from each other, I'm convinced we can increase the tempo and make the kind of change that we all know is needed.
Yeah.
So thank you for that, and back to you, Nick.
Thank you very much indeed, Carl. Yes, it's going to be a moderated panel by Carl, and I'm going to introduce the guests. First, we've got Glenn Oliver Anderson, a sustainable investing analyst at Fidelity, who is coming in with the magic of Zoom. He focuses on the integration of sustainability considerations in investment processes, development of thematic capabilities, identifying sustainable investment trends and strategic opportunities. Glenn joined Alliance Global Investors, or joined from Alliance Global Investors, where he was an ESG solutions specialist. And prior to that, he was at the UN Principles of Responsible Investment and Bank of Latvia. Also coming in by the magic of Zoom is Philip Ripman. He's portfolio manager and head of solutions at Storebrand Asset Management. Philip has been fund manager for Storebrand Global Solutions since May 2015. And the fund focuses on companies with solutions to challenges presented by the Sustainable Development Goals. And through his engagement with sustainability, Philip has advised several governments and institutions on topics ranging from coal exclusions, environmental impacts of human activities, to policy requirements to achieve international climate agreements. And last but not least, and I'd love to invite a real person to the stage. We've got a real person here. Thank you, so nice to see you. Hello.
See you.
I've got Gustavo, now you're going to correct me on this, Gustavo Junqueira? Junqueira. Okay, fantastic. He is the CEO of Sao Paulo State Investment Agency, Invest SP. And Gustavo's main goal is to introduce a policy to direct all government subsidies to the private sector. The research and development will be based on ESG frameworks currently being developed at Invest SP. Gustavo is also a member of the Commodities Commission at B3 Stock and Futures Exchange and a member of the National Academy of Agriculture. And until recently, you were the Secretary of Agriculture and Food Security for the state of Sao Paulo and responsible for the introduction of a new law that will lead to the largest reforestation program in the world currently underway in the state of Sao Paulo. You can probably talk a bit about that in the panel, but I just want to say from Ericsson's point of view, you also had some hand, I think, in the digitalization for farmers, helping them to get some of their crops to market and learn and educate and other things. Right, Carl, it's over to you. You're the moderator.
You're going to leave me alone.
I'm leaving you alone. Bye-bye. You're on your own there. Sorry about that, Gustavo.
Thank you.
You might be alone on stage, Gustavo, but we're in this together here now. So,
right.
But thanks, Nick, and I'm really excited now to have this discussion with a great panel. Fantastic with Glenn, Philip, and Gustavo. So great to have you here. And I wanted to get this conversation started, but just a bit of introduction on the first set of questions here. As we said before, we need to halve the emissions by 2030, and at Ericsson we achieved more than a halving of our own activities emissions within 8 years, and now we work towards halving the whole value chain emissions as well. And of course, we're doing this because we think this is the right thing to do, but also understand it's high importance to our owners, the investors, our shareholders, to ensure that we as an investment also align with the overall decarbonization of society. So to start off here, and maybe I start with you, Glenn, how are you engaging with companies in your portfolio when it comes to issues around climate change, and what are your expectations on them?
Sure. Thank you very much, Carl. So Fidelity International is an active and fundamental research house, and we are holding and investing into companies across the globe. So inherently, climate change for us is a global issue. However, as an active investor, it also allows us the potential to have structured and nuanced discussions to understand the climate change risks as well as opportunities within these companies. Fidelity International is also a signatory of several of the initiatives that, Carl, you kindly introduced in your keynote speech. So, of course, we're a signatory of the Principles of Responsible Investment, but more relevant for our discussion today, we're also a founding member of the Net Zero Asset Managers Initiative and an active participant in trying to align and contribute to investment industry standards and frameworks on climate change. And hence, we are very serious in trying to address this across our investment portfolios. And frankly, for climate change, there is no silver bullet solution to this. And so it's not just about trying to leave the position and that's going to solve the climate change. No, not at all. It's something where we do very much value the transition opportunities and a structured engagement dialogue, which forms the core of our climate change approach. And so in our response to your question of how we engage these firms, it really is a several-pronged solution to this, where we conduct targeted stewardship. So what I mean by that is we are very clear about the necessity for climate change to be addressed and for companies to set credible climate change transition plans to show how their capital expenditures are aligned with that. And more importantly as well, how climate is governed within the company. So to ensure that this is not just a tick the box exercise, but that it is something where we do believe that the robust checks and balances are in place. Further to that as well, we are, of course, very much aware of the science around climate change, and that there is necessity for the energy transition to happen across our investment portfolio. And I'll come back as well to the recent announcements that we have made last week. But finally, also recognizing the opportunities that exist within the Paris-aligned issuers and climate solutions that, as you mentioned, where technology is a key ingredient into the formula of climate alignment. I'll just finish off as well by saying that in order for us to also be able to have a very credible and integral conversation with our issuers, we must walk the talk ourselves. And so Fidelity International last week announced not just a commitment to climate target plans, but we had set out our own climate targets, where we are focusing on reducing our financed emissions by 50% at 2030, which is very much in line with the IPCC scenarios, as you may know. And also going net zero across our corporate activities by 2030, and aligning our energy transition plans with the OECD targets as guided by the climate science.
Excellent. Oh, thanks, Glenn. Full alignment there, clearly. If we go to you, Philip, how do you engage with companies in a portfolio? Is it different or similar to what Glenn just told us?
Well, I think, if we think about it from an asset management point of view, at least, we have, three main tools at our disposal. I think one is quite simply we can choose to invest in companies that represent the solution to some of these issues. We can also choose to not invest. And let's face it, there are some businesses out there that definitely have a business model that cause more harm than good. And we have to be able to draw a significant line in the sand and say, up until this point is okay, but no further. And then as you bring up our last opportunity is really our responsibility as an owner as well, to engage with companies that we do hold and make sure that those companies are in line, both with the science, as was already mentioned, but also with our own lines and targets on these issues. And I think on that note, we have several ways that we can do that. One is obviously with coalitions with other investors, where we pool together resources in order to be heard as one voice, perhaps, and to add leverage when we do approach companies. And one is perhaps our unique position within the Nordics to engage one-on-one with certain companies where we either have a brand value or a unique position, and where we can represent a certain point of view. And I think all of these tools really have to be utilized if we are to succeed. And I think, Carl, you brought up one of the key words that I always talk about, being a catalyst. We can either increase the change of pace, or the pace of change, that we're seeing, or we can be a detriment to it. And I think it's important that we do serve that role as being a catalyst if we are to succeed.
Sounds like a very active approach in these issues from both of you. And Gustavo, if you go to you on stage here, what would you like to add in your engagement with companies you invest or might invest in?
Highlighted by... Can you guys hear me?
Here we go. Okay. Now we hear you, Gustavo. Yes.
Perfect. Yeah, it's very aligned with what has been said here by the panelists. And the way we have to really think of all the discussion that is going on today in Scotland at the COP is that it's time really to act. And for now, most of the action has been led by corporations, by investment funds, by the private sector in general. Governments are lagging behind if you take a look worldwide. And the idea that really brought attention to us is that how can we have the state of São Paulo, which is the wealthiest and the most important state in Brazil. We have 27 states there that we represent 36% of the GDP. We need to, and I'm just reading here a sentence in the pavilion. We need to lead by example. So what we have decided to do is to set up a matrix, a framework actually, where we're going to define what are sustainable projects, because everyone has its own definition. So if we go back to the 80s in the United States, the credit market was a big confusion, and the banks would charge the companies whatever they could depending on the negotiation. And then came the credit rating agencies. And with the credit rating agencies, we basically normalized what are the spreads would be in the credit market. And that's what we are envisioning to put in place in the state of São Paulo. We're going to analyze all the projects, all the expansions, all the companies, and we're going to basically rate all these based on ESG protocols. Not only environment, but the social element is very important in Brazil, in Latin America, because if we don't solve the social challenges that we have, we're not going to solve the environmental problems. So what are we going to do? We're going to funnel all the investments in research and development, the benefits and incentives, tax benefits, all benefits that is granted by the state to those companies and those projects that are better rated. And that's it's the beginning of a big action, because we believe that the whole world order must be changed so that we can achieve what we are all asking for, which is a sustainable planet. If we go back to history, we had many phases, many stages of development to create wealth to the nations. First by war, by acquiring new territories, by expanding, that was the way it was. Then after 45 came the idea, no, if we have our companies, we can expand markets and consolidate consumers, and that the way we're going to create wealth. Well, those two phases are phases focused on benefits based on territory. And if we're talking about the planet, we need to talk and start changing from a territory vision to a system, to a process vision. So if it's going to be a sustainable process, those companies that are better rated, those countries that are better rated in sustainable index, they should have access to all markets, tax-free or with better benefits, because then everyone is aligned to the same objective. And that's what the state of São Paulo is thinking. How can we take everyone to the same direction? And by 2050, which is our commitment to have net zero in the state of São Paulo, we're going to have transformed the whole economy to a more sustainable economy, an economy based on all the elements that we all envisioning how that should be from here until there. But taking all the steps to reach that moment. And that's going to be multiple actions, but the state, the governments, they need to lead, they need to show where we want to get. And that's what we're doing.
Sounds like a very holistic approach. Thank you. Thanks a lot for that, Gustavo. Very useful to understand. And maybe a little bit on the same topic, and maybe I just go to you, Philip, to ask this one. There is a dynamic here, because, of course, between the investors and the companies. And to what extent do you think it's the role of investors to push for change versus companies to ensure that they appeal to investors and act, to sort of live up to the standards? How is that dynamic in your view?
I really think that we need both of these issues, right? We need investors to be active, to be heard, to push for change within the companies that they do hold. I think that's absolutely one viable route. And I think another one is, if we think about change, in my opinion, change actually has to come from the companies themselves. I think there's a lot of things that come up through investor engagement, and companies make adjustments, and I think that's a good thing. But if we think about real transformational change, because what we're talking about in a lot of senses are really changes to business models, those changes have to come from a desire within the companies themselves to want to change and to become something else. We don't have that many examples of this, throughout times. I mean, we've had Dong Energy in Denmark, obviously transitioned away from fossil fuels and into renewable power. And there are several others trying to follow the same blueprint. So when we come to that type of change, I really do think it has to be the companies themselves that see that this is an opportunity for them. This is an area where they can grow. This is an area where they can generate returns for their investors as well. Because let's face it, even though we do engage with companies and we want this change, our first and foremost priority is investing in companies to generate outperformance for our clients. And it is the case that these are companies, when we do invest in them, both from the transitional side and also the solution side, these are companies that we do think are well positioned for the future. And we would like to see more.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Philip. Yeah, I personally enjoy this dynamic, and in many of my investor meetings, of course, this is a topic, and we can help push each other, you could say. But on to the next topic here, and we've talked a lot here now about more and more capital being allocated to investment strategies that in one way or another incorporate ESG criteria. And a lot of very large numbers have been mentioned already here. But my question is a bit, I mean, some funds focus on selecting ESG high performers and excluding or underweighting then ESG laggards, if we call them that. And maybe here, again, if I start with you, Glenn, how do you view this, perhaps a dilemma or a choice of strategy between either investing in rewarding sustainable companies versus investing in less sustainable companies to actually get in there and help them or push them, if I can say so, to make a change, a transformation?
Yes, I hate to start off with this, but I want to say that it's actually not an either or decision in this regard. If we take a step back and look at the necessary steps that we need to take in achieving the coveted 1.5 degree target, it's an approach that merits both of these. So we definitely need more climate solutions on this, which I guess could be very much likened to the good ESG bunch, and that comes from the industrial side of things. That comes from applying existing known climate technologies and industrial innovation to companies. On the other hand, as well, we have to decarbonize the existing book of assets and capital that exists within the economy. So it's really a transition approach instead of, I think, selecting an either or. And my personal view is that in the future we will see these two converge. I think that's the role as well that we as the investment community are playing, is to really help to facilitate that transition and promote best practice. I guess if I'm being more concrete as well, there are three big pillars around which we want to see the climate transition happen across issuers. And in net zero ambitions, the first pillar, we would, this is an approach that covers what are the current emissions, what are the targets that are set by companies, what's the credibility of the targets that they are setting, and combined with the second part of climate solutions, for example, where the EU taxonomy has certainly clarified what a science-based climate target would look like. Yes, it's certainly a potent combination for this.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now I'm a bit curious, Gustavo, the way you described your work in state of Sao Paulo as well. Are you channeling investments more to the greener, the more sustainable initiatives, or are you putting money on perhaps high emitters in order to promote this change?
Oh, I think as mentioned before, it's a holistic approach, but needs to be done in a organized way. And the rating system is the way that we believe we can be fair in allocating capital to those companies that are providing the best results. So it's also based on performance. If we have a new technology that is coming online, we have to look at how that new technology will disrupt the system and how that will, over time, accommodate also the social impact of those changes. We're all talking about electric cars, which is nice. I think it reduces emission, But if we don't look at in the whole system, since the source until the end consumer, we're just not doing it in the right way. We're just confusing the consumer in a greenwashing way. So what we do is really to look over the whole value chain based on ESG protocols. What we think is that there's some discussion regarding, we need to have governments also implementing new green solutions or new ESG solutions, but we don't have the time to mature those initiatives. If we take a company, for example, they have a business plan. And that business plan is what allows them to raise capital with all these different funds so they can implement their strategy. Governments, they change very rapidly. It's a combination of interests. So it's unfair to ask a mayor to really implement a more environmental friendly strategy or investment, because he's not able to raise capital because that's not really organized. So as the financial system, we need to organize and make sure that we have the right capital for the right time, for the right investment and the right timing. I think that's a coordination important that we need to put in place.
Interesting. Thanks, Gustavo. And Philip, what's your view on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of briefly just chime in and really echo what Gustavo was saying when it comes to this approach in terms of looking at the entire value chain. I think that's a really important dimension that needs to be looked at, not just isolatedly at either an issuer or a singular company, but how the effect is across the board. But I'd also draw a slight warning in terms of, we've talked a little bit about ESG ratings. And I think one of the key issues that ESG ratings have had over a number of years has been their kind of focus on the kind of policy approach on risk reducing systems. And once you get to the kind of amalgamation of, several KPIs or key performance indicators that generate these scores, sometimes a little bit of it gets washed out. And I think it's important then to say that, I think scores can get you so far, but I think then, attaching that to this kind of value chain approach that Gustavo is talking about is important, so that you can really highlight the impact that a company has really through its products and services, not through, let's say, its health and safety systems, albeit an important part, but not the key feature of why you buy or not buy a company. It would be the equivalent of, let's say, buying an oil company because of their health and safety record, rather than the fact that they're an oil company, which should be your primary entry point. Or not buying, as the case would be.
Yeah, thank you so much. There are many more topics to discuss, including that of reporting standards, and there were some interesting announcements today as well around the formation of the International Sustainability Standards Board, etc. However, I believe our time is actually up, and we have to respect that. So I just wanted to close now, actually, and thank all of you, my fellow panelists here, and but also we don't have time for this event and for providing the opportunity to discuss these important questions between investors and companies, how we can come together to push for climate action. So thank you, and back to you, Nick. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much indeed, Carl, and thank you to all our panelists, both physical and on Zoom. I wouldn't mind if you could all just hang around for just 1 second, because we're going to go to our hub in Stockholm, because we think they might have a question for the panelists, if that's possible. Stockholm, are you there? Hello, yes. Stockholm.
Yes, we are. Hey,
fantastic.
Nick.
Hi.
Thank you for fascinating discussions from all of you. I have with me David, who is the CEO and founder
I'm afraid we
Iceberg,
cannot hear.
And he has a question for our speakers.
Okay, who can't hear this? Anybody can't hear this? Carl?
I could not hear. No.
You can't hear? You can't hear. Well, that's tricky.
Okay, do you hear now?
You tell me what the question is and I'll ask it.
Okay, so the question is, if we want to have the change we need, we will probably need to move in to a world where carbon is properly priced. 100 euros per ton is a figure that, for example, Johan Rockström has mentioned. Do you use this counting with 100 carbon per ton as a way of looking at if your business model is future-proof at Ericsson and at suppliers, and also in investment decisions?
Okay, so the question was, carbon price. Is $100 a ton a good price that kind of guides your activities, actions, whatever? I'm shorthanding this, by the way. But the question is, do you think carbon pricing is a good thing? Do you have a notion in terms of your company and in terms of suppliers, what it might be? Yeah, if you have some quick answers to this, please fire away. Anybody?
Let's go to the panelists. Philip?
Sure, no, I definitely think one of the focuses, right, of the COP meeting is to see whether or not we can get an international agreement on an international market for carbon prices. And I absolutely think that is one market mechanism we do need if we're going to succeed in getting the polluters to pay and obviously then potentially funding up lower carbon solutions. I think it's interesting to see now that we see increasing numbers of both countries and regions are actually now within kind of carbon markets. I believe China launched its own carbon trading scheme not that long ago. But it also has to be taken into account that some of the offsets that have existed within some of these trading schemes haven't necessarily been what we were hoping for them to be. So I think the quality of those offsets have to be looked at, and also kind of the role of offsets within these types of issues as well as a part of it. But I absolutely do think that a carbon market is both needed and seems to be on its way, given the number of countries that are committed to it. Now, whether $100 a ton is enough or whether that should increase, I'm going to plead the 50. I'm not entirely sure, but time will tell, I hope.
Okay, good. And probably a stable price is also quite useful for business. But anyway, Fidelity, please come in on this one, please. Our colleague with Fidelity.
Sure. I very much echo Philip's remarks that carbon pricing is urgently needed. And I think that's really, from my experience as well right now in Glasgow, that's where all of the eyes are on. What will be the outcomes on the well-renowned Article 6 negotiations here at COP26. The carbon pricing effect that would come on the economy, we see from two sides, on the macroeconomic side and the microeconomic effects that would come through that. On the macro side, there's certainly, from our research and studies, that would have an effect on the costs in the short term in the economy. But there are also then the benefits, as mentioned previously, on internalizing the polluter pays principle and the external effects that carbon emissions have on the rest of the economy. To keep the rest of my answer short, on the micro level as well, that is something that can incentivize change that at the individual company level, and certainly for us as investors, create also more transparency in terms of the implication of the financial implications that carbon emission has on the financial profile of the firm. But it also sets an important incentive and almost a carrot mechanism for incentivizing new green technologies and the competitiveness of those in the market.
Super, Glenn. Thank you very much indeed. Gustavo.
I think before we discuss pricing, we need to discuss that we have to have a market.
Yeah.
Right? If there's someone willing to sell and someone willing to buy, we already see that going on. You see companies buying carbon and some producers, especially in Brazil, that now we're organizing the carbon market. There's plenty of people that own forests and they want to sell carbon. So I think things are starting to move on and prices will be a consequence of the market.
Recording in progress.
Super. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much, Stockholm, for that question. I hope I asked it vaguely correctly, and you got some vaguely correct responses as well, probably much more than vaguely correct. Thanks, everybody. Gustavo, it's so fantastic that you came to Glasgow, and it's great to have you on stage.
Appreciate it.
And bye-bye, all our friends from Scandinavia.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Each and everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. It is, yes. Let's just go to Washington, D.C. and see if we've got anything that would like to be said from Washington. Hello, Washington. Are you with us?
Hello, Nick. Okay, so we are really excited to introduce the next panelist. We
Okay.
are introducing Peter Mckillip. Climate and Capital Media was founded by Peter and senior financial executives. Prior to founding Climate and Capital Media, he was a managing director at BlackRock, where he led global communication campaigns to build strong, sustainable brands focused on ESG, impact, sustainability, and climate change. Mr. Mckillip spent most of his early career as a correspondent and bureau chief for Newsweek magazine in New York, Tokyo, and Hong Kong.
So what I would say, Shweta, is we're really excited to hear from our dear friend Mckillip, but it's just come a little bit too early in the schedule. This comes just slightly later. So that was a super introduction. Let's just hold it there for a second. And Peter, we will have you on the show very shortly when Katarina is moderating. So don't worry, we'll be back with you. No problem at all. We'd like to go now to really the last bit of this segment, which is an interview that I recently did with Lewis Pugh. Lewis Pugh here at COP26. Lewis Pugh is being described as the Sir Edmund Hillary of swimming. He is the first person to complete a long-distance swim in every ocean of the world, and he frequently swims in vulnerable ecosystems to draw attention to their plight. Lewis is best known for undertaking the first swim across the North Pole in 2007 with the aim of highlighting the melting of the Arctic sea ice. In 2013, the United Nations Environment appointed him as the first UN patron of the oceans, and he has also founded the Lewis Pugh Foundation to preserve our oceans for a peaceful and sustainable future. If we could play the interview, please, gentlemen, that would be great. So I'm really delighted here at COP26 on the first day to bump into Lewis Pugh, who is an endurance swimmer. He has swum in some of the most amazing parts of the world, and we're going to hear a little bit about that. And he's also the United Nations Environment Programs, or United Nations Environment Patron of the Oceans. Lewis, great to see you here in Glasgow.
Thank you so much, thank you.
So Lewis, tell me a little bit, and tell the audience, why are you here at COP26?
It's to bring a message about what I've been seeing in the polar regions specifically and bring it from the polar regions here to Glasgow. So I've been swimming now for 35 years. 18 of those years have been spent in the polar regions, and the changes which I've been seeing are so fast. And so it's to share a message about the speed and the scale of the climate crisis and what I have witnessed firsthand from the North Pole down to Antarctica, recently just come back from Greenland. Share that and how that will impact all of us around the world and every future generation.
Exactly. I mean, I think before you started this, I don't think people really quite realize, A, what an extraordinary thing you were doing in these ocean systems to alert the world to climate change, but also what you had to do to train yourself for this. And in a sense, it's more like a metaphor of how humanity needs to really get very quickly trained up and to move very fast through very difficult terrain to actually get us to a safe landing. I mean, is that part of the message?
Yes, I mean the training for these expeditions is enormous. So the first big cold water swim which I did was in 2007, and it was across the North Pole. So it was a very, very simple message. Here is one person swimming across a place which until recently has been completely frozen over, to share a message about how the Arctic is melting. That you can even swim across the North Pole now. Now you can imagine the training for something like that took me 5 years. Because nobody had ever done a swim in anywhere close to this water temperature before. The water's even below zero, it's minus 1.7 degrees centigrade, it's unbelievably cold. But it was a message about courage, diving in, and commitment. And I think that's the message also for the world leaders now. We need to dive in, we need to have commitment, and we need to take action.
Are you very worried now? Because when you started this journey, the science said this. Now the science is speaking even more loudly and ringing the alarm bells. We are seeing impacts all over the world. We need to halve our emissions by 2030. There are these promises to achieve net zero by 2050. But are you more nervous now about the future than you were perhaps when you started?
I'm very, very worried. I couldn't put it at a higher level. When I did my first swim in the Arctic, I swam on the edge of the Antarctic ice packs. The water there at the time was 3 degrees. I went back there recently, it's no longer 3 degrees, it's now 10 degrees centigrade.
Wow.
That's the speed at which that warming is occurring. I've just come back from Greenland, where I did a swim across the face of the Ilulissat Glacier. That glacier is now moving at a speed of 40 meters per day. You know, if you're not worried, you're not on top of the science.
Yeah. I mean, it's incontrovertible. I mean, whether it be sea gauges, whether it be weather records, and whether it be actually, the measurement of what's happened to ice, it's incontrovertible. Do you think we've got enough time to actually save ourselves? Because in the end, this is what it's about. Not the planet, it will survive, but save ourselves.
I think the science is quite clear that the action needs to take place now over the next 10 years. And if we don't do that, then we are really in a very, very difficult situation. And so my message here for world leaders is commitment is important. Getting consensus is important. Getting long-term targets are important. But even more important is taking action today. I get frustrated, I cringe when I hear world leaders making promises for 2050, 2060. There's not a political leader in the world or a business leader that won't make promises for 30, 40 years' time, when we know full well they won't be here. We need stuff happening right now, and we need all hands on deck to solve this crisis.
Thank you, Lewis. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. I do hope that the message you're bringing really does bring that change, and you're one of the most powerful voices on this, and you are swimming the talk, not just walking the talk, but swimming the talk. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Nick.
Well, that was Lewis Pugh, and he's one of the most amazing motivational speakers. If you ever wanted to even just have Lewis come and speak at an event of yours, he can animate you so quickly about these challenges. It's quite incredible. So now we're going to ask Ingmar Renshag, the founder of We Don't Have Time, back to our stage. Come on down, Ingmar. Tell us a bit about the app and the app activity.
It's a lot of activities, and I would like to start with some good news, and that's South Africa.
Aha.
They've been giving climate love on our platform because they have pledged to end their dependency on coal, and they are one of the worst countries in the world that still are very dependent on coal.
That's brilliant.
And they're not just pledging it, they're actually putting money behind that pledge now. And that's exactly what we need. Thank you so much, South Africa.
That's fantastic. And of course, their pavilion, the viewers can't see it, is right opposite us. So
yeah.
Well done, South Africa.
And they have also allowed us to work in their pavilion.
They've been very nice about that. We needed that space.
We love South Africa, thank you. But I do also, listen to the previous speaker. This is really serious situation we are in. And sometimes it's easy to forget that. But we have some warning. And all those pledges, all those love working for solutions, they will not come into place if we don't end the fossil fuel subsidies. And therefore, We Don't Have Time today launched an initiative and targeted the G20 leaders. They are the ones that could change this.
Yeah.
And they have actually pledged on several occasions that they will end these subsidies, but they are not doing it. So what we are demanding them is to lead and actually come up with an end date. We need to set an end date for fossil fuel subsidies.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just talk, blah, 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 blah.
Yes, yes.
Set that end date and show that you take science seriously. Otherwise, we will all drown if we can't swim, as the previous speaker.
Yeah, good point. Thank you very much indeed, Ingmar. And we now move to the next segment. No, we don't, actually. We're going to have a We Don't Have Time movie explaining how together we can fix the climate crisis. Thank you.
We grow up and we play we invent new ways of doing things, and we collaborate. We prepare for that special date, and we care for each other. We do whatever it takes, but our world is on fire, and our future is at stake. We don't have time to wait, but no country, business, or individual can fix this on their own. Together, we can set things straight. Let's act. Through the power of many, we can make change happen. Let's encourage sustainable solutions. Let's suggest new ways of doing things and demand bad practices to stop. We all unite behind the one thing that matters, to save our world. Will you join us?
Breaking the boundaries requires disruptors in many sectors of society, in terms of businesses, innovators, policies, and also technologies. And in this, the finance sector is a key actor to make this happen. In this sector, in this section that we call the disruptors, we are now starting with 3 keynote speakers. It is my pleasure to first introduce Alva Jonevret. Alva is a business and project manager at Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And in Alva's position, she's working with the initiative's assessment process and making sure its members are on the right path to halve their emissions by 2030. Previously, Alva worked with the green startups and scale-ups in New York in the Swedish-American Chamber of Commerce. So warm welcome here on the stage in Glasgow, Alva Jonevret. And you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Katarina. So we need strong climate action in business, and we need strong climate action in finance. I will start off telling why this is needed, how it works, and how we can scale this to finance. But first off, we'll start off zooming in a little bit, what's happening on the market. So what we can see in the car industry is that Tesla is the most valuable country in the world, passing established automakers. While in the energy sector, we can see how renewable energy companies are passing fossil-based companies in valuation. And we can see how this is starting to happen across all industries. So, as we can see here, we're now using fossil energy, fossil vehicles, fossil material, and linear business models, but this need to be shifted. This need to be shifted to renewable energy, to shared and electrified vehicles, to fossil-free material, to circular business models. But maybe you wonder, how can companies then be part of this transformation? How can companies align with the 1.5 degree ambition? Well, this is all what the Business Playbook is about. The Business Playbook is a guide on simplicity, speed, and action, and it's anchored in the latest UN Race to Zero criteria. It's supported by organizations representing 780 billion USD in revenue, 1.75 million employees, and we've seen a 50% growth the past year. Next slide, please. So, and some of these businesses we can see here. So maybe you wonder, what is required then to align with this? Well, next slide, please. Companies must at least halve emissions before 2030, but preferably much faster. They need to integrate climate in their business strategy. They need to contribute to climate action in society, and they need to report on their progress annually and transparently. And this pretty much sums up the 4-pillar framework. which a whole lot of organizations already have accepted. So it starts with a commitment. Be part of the race to zero. And we encourage every business out there and every financial actor out there to align with the race to zero and to join. And there are various ways to do this. For an SME, you can join the SME Climate Hub. For a corporation, you can join the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And we're seeing that the companies now joining Race to Zero are growing exponentially. So make sure to be part of that journey. So to zoom in a little bit on the 4 pillars, well, the first one is mainly about reducing emissions from energy, from buildings, from vehicles, from manufacturing processes, and from business travel. We need to move to 100% renewable energy. The second pillar is really about the value chain. It's about the suppliers. It's about the usage of your products. And this requires radical collaboration. You, as a business, you need to request your suppliers to have emissions before 2030. And that's why we have started an initiative called the 1.5 degree supply chain leaders, bringing these tools together to show how this can be done in a practical way. The second pillar is also about downstream. It's about the product. How much energy does it consume? How can we make it recyclable, repairable? How can we prolong its lifespan? The first and the second pillar are really the basic foundation. But I guess you're interested in how to create a competitive advantage. Then we have to move on to the third pillar. Companies and financial institutions move much further. The third pillar is really about reviewing and updating the company's vision, mission statement, and value proposition, and incorporate climate and nature. You as a business, you need to analyze how do we move the product and solutions portfolio to help our customers avoid our emissions. How do we help our customers achieve a 1.5 degree aligned lifestyle? It is of great importance to phase out the products today, increasing the emissions. And we need to switch to circular and service-based business models. The fourth pillar is really about influencing climate action in society. We need to help achieve a social tipping point. We need to spread the business playbook, and we need to invest in nature-based solutions. So what Katarina and Carl earlier talked about is that 450 public development banks today pledged to align with the Paris Agreement. This is all great news, but we're not there yet. So what should you remember from all this? Well, the business playbook really provides a guideline for frontline financial actors to align with the UN Race to Zero and the 1.5 degree business playbook and the ambition. It's a tool for suppliers, for customers, and portfolio companies. And we look forward to continue scaling these tools exponentially. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Alva Jondered, for spelling it out so clearly. Excellent presentation. Thank you. The next speaker is Mats Pellbeck-Sharp. He is head of sustainability at Ericsson. And as in this position, he's responsible for climate action, also for circular economy and energy performance and triple bottom line. And just not triple bottom line, but specifically also triple bottom line for products, services, and also for company operations. And Mats, you've been a sustainability pioneer, really, in facilitating the ICT industry to stepping forward in this field. So it's now my pleasure to have you deliver your keynote.
Thank you. I think you are exaggerating a bit there, but anyway, thank you very much. And today I'm going to talk about something completely different, in fact. So I'm going to talk about mobile money and financial inclusion. And maybe you think that money is green. Money is not green at all. Money is orange, in fact. And it's thanks to Orange and MTN and other customers, the mobile operators in Africa, that now customers in those countries can get an opportunity for the first time ever to get a bank account. They can first place their money in a safe place to keep it there. We're not having to carry around cash and be uncertain about those type of things. also increase the speed and safety of all transactions that they are doing. And not only that, I mean, you can, instead of having to walk with the money to a place, you can now transfer money over the mobile internet. So I think that there are several things that mobile money provides to this continent. And it's really great for us at Ericsson, and being now arguably the biggest provider of mobile wallets in the Global South. And this is really something that is important for the Global South, because, I mean, during the 5 last years, financial inclusion has reached a lot of people. I mean, it has tripled in Ghana, reaching now 90% of the population that are in the age brackets. At the same time, in parallel, in Angola it has grown 5 times during this period, and in Nigeria 15 times. So, and in both these countries, Angola and Nigeria, we are now reaching 50% of the population in the range, and that is like 100 million people in the Global South. So just imagine the growth in this Global South and in Africa is 43% of the mobile money. And that is really thanks to the financial solution. And I just want to think about this from a climate perspective, because financial security is also bringing climate resilience to the population that are mostly hurt and most vulnerable in the world. So bringing people out of poverty is not only good for climate, it's also good for all sustainable development goals. And just remember that this happens in a record time. Now we can see it happening much faster than anything else, and that is just an example of how mobile financial solutions and digitalization can help drive exponential change in society, and that goes across from financial inclusion as well as into climate action and in a lot of other areas. And with this, I really would like to keep my time here and say thank you for listening online, and get Katarina back on stage. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Mats. It's so lovely to have you here, and fantastic work you do. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next keynote speaker founded his company at his kitchen table, and it now has a reach of, well, working in 155 countries. It's my pleasure to introduce Ant Moorhouse, who is co-founder of EarthTech. And Ant and his team at EarthTech are on a mission to help impact entrepreneurs, attract the financial and also the human capital that is needed to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. So he's with us on Zoom, so let's see if we can get, yes, lovely. You have the floor, Ant.
Thank you very much. So I spent the first decade of my career in the Army as a Special Forces commander. While my values no longer align with that mission, it was incredible to be part of a small, high-performance team on a mission after 9/11. In the second decade of my career, I was an entrepreneur, serial entrepreneur, starting and scaling businesses, but with no real thought to the impact that those businesses were having on society or our planet. And whilst being a normal entrepreneur certainly was exciting, it lacked the purpose of my previous career. There was something missing ultimately from my soul. In 2018, I saw for myself the damage that climate change had created to the Great Barrier Reef, and at a similar time saw the passion that people like Greta Thunberg were sparking globally, particularly with young people. I knew that I had to act with everything at my disposal, but I must admit that my initial motivation was selfish. I was worried about what my kids were going to think about me on my deathbed if my efforts hadn't have been with everything that I had, with all of the resources at my disposal. At EarthTech, we are on a mission to fast track the deployment of capital towards impact-focused innovation. Impact investment is the fastest growing asset class in the world, but most of that capital is stuck at the top. Risk appetites are too low, due diligence processes are set far too high, and the result is that the innovation that we need to make our species sustainable isn't being scaled up fast enough. It takes an impact entrepreneur, on average, 12 months to raise a sophisticated capital round. The core innovators at these companies are spending 60% of their time raising capital or trying to raise capital rather than focusing on proving and scaling their innovation. The system requires these incredibly intelligent, motivated, and ambitious change makers to legitimately fight with one arm tied behind their back at the very time that humanity needs them to be as efficient as possible. We need these change makers focused on proving and scaling their innovation, not trying to navigate through the complexities and the confusion of capital markets. We need this now more than ever if we are to get our societies, both developed and emerging, to move from where we are to where we need to get to. According to the UN, we need $4 trillion of new capital flowing into sustainability every year if we are to meet the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. And the current system just isn't equipped to deploy that capital fast enough. I believe that there are three core things that are needed to fix this problem. Governments need to provide more tax incentives, similar to charitable donations, for investments into innovation that are focused on solving for the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly that are focused on removing greenhouse gases from our atmosphere. Two, early stage investors need to make their due diligence processes, their decision-making processes, far more transparent. These entrepreneurs are prepared to walk over hot coals to present investors with the information they need in the formats that they need to make their decisions. And all they ask is a little bit of feedback in return. But the investment process is shrouded in opaqueness. And finally, and most importantly, we need more heroes. Individuals, families, corporates, and funds who are prepared to take bigger risks to get their capital off the sidelines and into the fight faster, to use their capital as if their planet demanded it, needed it, because it does. I'm reminded of an old Will Smith movie called Independence Day, where all of the nations of the world were fighting amongst themselves until there was an alien invasion, which caused all of the countries to come together as one species to fight the good fight together. Now, we aren't faced by an alien invasion, at least that I know of, but we are faced with an existential threat, a crisis of our own making. And we need to assume a warlike footing, not with guns, but with sustainable innovation and the capital needed to fuel it. Ultimately, money is currency and currency is energy. And we need more of that energy flowing into early stage innovation faster. And to do that, we need to change the paradigm through which we view investment decisions, because the lives of my children and of your children demand it, and they will expect and accept nothing less from us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for pointing out so clearly that we need all hands on deck and that all of us matter in this process. Not to say the least, the companies that, the money that needs to be funneled into these initiatives. I now hand over to Washington, D.C., to my colleague Shweta Chakraborty, who will now introduce Peter Mckillip. I hope he is still with us here at Washington. So I hand over to you, Shweta. Great to see you.
Great to see you too, Katarina. Okay,
Recording
let's
in
take two on
progress.
this. Really thrilled to introduce our next speaker, Peter Mckillip. Climate and Capital Media was founded by Peter and senior financial executives. Prior to founding Climate and Capital Media, Peter was the managing director at BlackRock, where he led global communication campaigns to build strong, sustainable brands focused on ESG, impact, sustainability, and climate change. Peter spent most of his early career as a correspondent and bureau chief for Newsweek magazine in New York, Tokyo, and even Hong Kong, where he covered key economic, financial, social, and political issues. Welcome, Peter. We're really excited to hear your reflections so far and your thoughts going forward on COP26.
I'd like to address three megatrends that are happening in the financial world, and then perhaps one or two issues that we have to deal with. We've talked a lot today about the total private capital, and that's something we look at very, very carefully. Mark Carney talked about $130 trillion. That's a lot of money. I was thinking about it today. If you put it into the context, the US GDP is 23 trillion. Total world equities is 121 million. And OPEC oil reserves are 100 trillion. And what that really tells you, and what we really have found is the foundation of what we do, is we are seeing the greatest transformation of an economy and the greatest allocation of capital probably in the history of mankind. And it's going to be going to all the areas that you need, whether it's electricity, transport, or industry. The key here, though, is that the caveat that we have to understand here is that these are at the moment just promises and commitments. They've all committed. Everyone is committed, and that's what so often happens with, it doesn't matter whether it's a country pledge or a financial pledge, but these are commitments, and these are also commitments that are only really going to start until 2030. The good news is that when we started this 2.5 years ago, no one was talking about this. So there's an entire kind of financial infrastructure that's going into place. The second megatrend, which a lot of folks have talked about, is obviously around private capital. Larry Fink, my former boss and CEO of BlackRock, talks about how the next 1,000 billionaires are going to be startups in climate tech, or he thinks there's going to be 1,000 billionaires who are going to be doing climate tech. The climate tech area is booming. It's starting to, but it's still a small, tiny percentage of what really about the level of capital that we're already seeing. It's also in its very, very early days. But it's interesting that all the areas that we're starting to look at are beginning to be invested in. The challenge, of course, is what is 16 billion, which is the amount roughly that's been spent on climate venture in the first half of 2021. When you compare that to the $4.4 trillion that's going to be necessary to capital for the next every year until the year 2050. But there's a third one, which is a very, very important one, which people have really not talked about, which is really the transformation of capital from the developed world to the developing world. And there, the developed world has not lived up to its promise. That's $100 billion a year that is needed to kind of help the developing world make this extraordinary transition. Indian Prime Minister Modi has said that at least almost $1 trillion in climate finance is going to have to be transferred from developed to developing nations. The problem is very little of that has already been done. And obviously one of the key areas that we're going to be talking about, or COPs are going to be talking about, is how can you get that going? There is also, I think, one of the greatest conundrums that we probably face, and it's the one that is the hardest that's going to be fixed. And again, it reflects kind of the challenge of the developing world versus the developed world. 2/3 of the carbon that's going to be burnt is going to be burnt in Asia. It's going to be burnt in India, China, across Southeast Asia. The vast majority of new carbon plants, 600, are going to be built in China, India, Indonesia, Japan, and Vietnam. The growth there is happening. And I think the Chinese and have been very blunt about what they plan to do. And it isn't, frankly, really in line with a lot of what we're hearing at COP, which is that they insist on balancing decarbonization with survival and development. And they argue that that decarbonization is going to have to take into consideration these issues. So, for example, to reduce poverty in Africa by 30% will require a 204% increase in emissions. So this is the challenge. And it's the challenge of how you're going to develop, you're going to slowly decarbonize vast portions of the developing world, which are completely dependent up to now on coal and oil. And how are you going to do that in a way that allows development to continue? It's very, there are some very interesting schemes that are underway where much of that $100 billion, for example, could be used to kind of help sunset these carbon plants. But this, to me, is one of the critical areas that we have to look at going forward. So the good news is that the world is organizing its financial system to begin to build this great grand green economy. The good news is that there's going to be 1,000 billionaires in the future who are going to be at the forefront of this clean tech climate revolution. But the big challenge, the challenge that is absolutely critical, is how are we going to transform the developing world, particularly vast portions of Asia and Africa, and get them to decarbonize in a way that they can continue to develop. And here and there is really very much a political solution. And that's the one which I think world leaders are going to have to wrestle with for many, many years to come. So thank you.
Peter, thank you very much for those comments. My question to you, as somebody who is at that intersection between finance and media, where do you see the messaging lagging? Where is it that we can actually talk about some of these megatrends that you described so well in a way that really resonates with the different audiences you're trying to reach across the developed world and in the developing world? How do we adjust messaging so it's actually received and it can actually be acted upon? I know this is a challenge that you've grappled with, especially as somebody who's in the media now talking about these different issues and trends. What can you tell us, and especially those who are working to communicate around these types of issues in climate, especially in finance? What is the best way? What have you seen and learned is really working? What isn't? And what are the real takeaways for those who are thinking about talking about these issues across a broad range of audiences?
Well, of course, it's working with We Don't Have Time and Climate and Capital. No, seriously, there is a big issue here, which is that the existing social media platforms, particularly Facebook and Twitter, and I would say Facebook in particular, just are not built for the climate age. And as a result, not only are you getting disinformation, but you're getting just the lack of education. So to me, one of the critical issues is how are we going to democratize social media? That there are obviously many efforts underway, but that one more than almost anything could have the greatest impact on how people, on how people communicate. There's a second one, which is that we have very different regimes in place. So the democracy and the openness that we're seeing today at COP26 in the West is quite different than the way, for example, China approaches its sense of democracy and its sense of communication. These are all going to be, just areas where you have to figure out a better way to communicate both via social media, and also the organizations themselves have to be more connected. And so I think if I were an entrepreneur today, and I wanted to be that next billionaire, how am I going to connect these thousands of organizations? How am I going to do it in a way that's impact? How am I going to develop a social media platform that is not about taking data or disinformation, and building one that allows people to really understand and be educated on all these very, very important mega trends? One final way we're trying to do it is to also just talk about the people, companies, and the themes that we think are important. And I think that's another way, just to tell great stories about the great work that's going to really help transform the economy.
Yes, absolutely. That's what it is, isn't it? It's really telling that story, and it's sharing it in a way that resonates. So thank you. Those were very illuminating remarks. I'm going to toss it over to my colleague, in Glasgow, Katarina, for some more questions for you, Peter. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jutta. And do you have any more comments to add, Jutta or Peter, before we turn to Stockholm to see what reflections they have?
I am good. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Peter, for your brilliant contribution to this broadcast on finance. And
all right.
We really need all hands on deck and all good forces, especially communications is key. We know that, right?
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you very much, Jutta. So now let's see what we have cooking in Stockholm. If there are any reflections or comments from our colleagues in our We Don't Have Time hub in Stockholm.
Hey, Katarina.
Hello, Sarah. How are you?
It was great to hear from Peter, and I hope we can actually create this social media he's been talking about. This is very interesting for us that we don't have time. When we talk about climate action, we usually talk on two levels, the individual level or the system level. And as an individual, myself, I wondered, what can I do? And how do we make individuals to trust the finance world in the end? Because they're the key part when we talk about climate action. So I wonder if any of our guests had reflections about that.
Let's turn back to Peter, because I think he's still connected with us. The issue of trust, Peter, how do we address this?
Trust is key. And I think this is a real issue right now. And I think the biggest issue, and I'm going to, obviously, my comments are going to be around kind of Western, the West, and particularly around asset managers and around banks. There's a tsunami of greenwash, and there's a boom in so-called ESG products, and that can be seen as a great thing. The challenge, of course, is that there's a lot of skepticism out there as to whether or not this E, S, or G is really doing the job that they're doing, and the jury is out. And it's one of the reasons why the Europeans, for example, said you couldn't just take an existing fund and change its name. For the most part, most ESG funds are not really doing the job that they should be doing. So that, to me, is a potential very serious area of concern. I think where you see much greater impact and and much greater trust is going to be in the actual, impact projects, the venture capital, the private capital that's going into private equity. But I think there's still a big problem here, which is that at the end of the day, and this particularly is true for the large banks and for the asset managers, they are basically caught between two key things. On the one hand, they're making commitments for 2050, and they have long-term commitments to finance and to invest into all sorts of great efforts in new energies. They also have a quarterly commitment, a quarterly financial commitment to their shareholders. That tension is at the very core of the distrust and also the ability to really go forward. So how, at some point, there has to be a recognition within the quarterly results of these companies as to just how important it is that this green transition is going on. And anyone who has listened to a quarterly financial briefing from a bank or an asset manager, you may hear a little bit, that's not really what they're talking about. So at the end of the day, you have to sort out the short-term gain that is really driving much of any private enterprise, but certainly financial capital and enterprise, along with these kind of longer term commitments. And I'm waiting to see, and the trust will be built when we begin to see those two pieces come together.
Thank you very much, Peter. And this is, of course, Sarah, very much what we're trying to do. We don't have time to add transparency and also the power of many to call the ones out that are not really pulling their weight, and also to lift up the ones that are, right?
Exactly. I think that's what we are all trying to do. We don't have time, and I think that everyone should try to join us as soon as possible.
Well, thank you very much, Stockholm. And now we're going to Bangkok, actually, to a pre-recorded message from our man in Bangkok, Matthias Goldman.
Negotiations go on throughout the 2 weeks, but there's 5 events and dates I want us to focus particularly on. 1st and 2nd of November, the World Leaders Summit, where they will deliver enhanced action and come with new nationally determined contributions. Had a focus on that. Moving to the 3rd of November, the Day of Finance, according to the COP presidency. That's where we'll hopefully see more pledges, more money for the Green Climate Fund and for other institutions, and for more overseas development. The 4th, energy. The Energy Day, that's where we see more pledges moving out of coal, quickening up the speed for renewables. Then there's other days. Every day has their theme. And when we move towards the middle of the 2nd week, the Transport Day, the 10th, I believe we'll see new coalitions here for the move towards a fossil-free transport sector with focus obviously on electric cars. And then of course, the last few days, the 12th, officially the final day, where we'll hopefully see a negotiated result, a full rule book for the Paris Agreement, Article 6 in place. But bear in mind that COPs over the years have dragged out during the weekends. I'd say that we might very well still be in Glasgow for COP the 13th and perhaps even the 14th of November.
Thank you very much, Matthias Goldman, in from Bangkok, and just for pointing out the most important dates of the COP. And now to join me on stage, Ingmar Rentzhog. Let's see what activity we have had on the app.
It's a lot of activities in the app, and solutions. We need more solutions. So if you download the We Don't Have Time app, you will find a lot of solutions that exist, but those solutions need to be financed. So we need actually to achieve two things. We need to share and spread awareness and educate people about the solutions we have, because so many solutions actually exist to the problem. But we also need all the investors to put their money into these solutions. And I think that the invest movement is good, but what I would like to see is a pro-invest movement, where you actually actively choose to invest in the solutions. Because if you do that, you will have no money left to invest in the problem.
It's simple math.
And when again, as soon as this fossil fuel counter is going to end, all the fossil fuel investments will be very, very bad. So de-invest for that and invest in the future. That is what's going on in the app. So bring in your wallet, open the app, find the solutions, and invest in them.
Thank you, Ingmar Rentzhog. And this concludes the section of disruptors, and we now move into the next segment on behavioral change. Efter första panelen. Changing human mindsets and also habits with tools like policy and communication is of course also part of the picture, an important part of the picture. You will now meet experts in this field and also doers in incorporating the transformation into how we think, how we act, and we do this in two separate panel discussions. It is now my pleasure to hand over to moderate the first panel, Emily Olander from Ericsson. And Emily is Climate Action Program Manager at Ericsson. And she has the responsibility for executing the climate strategy and also project objectives of the company. She works with Ericsson's own activities, employee engagement, as well as external partners to demonstrate how connectivity and also innovation really drives exponential climate action. So please now, well, you can't give a warm hand of applause because you're all over the world watching this, but I can. Come up, join me, Emily Olander.
Thank you.
A hand over to you.
Thank you so much. Super, welcome to this. I'm really looking forward to that. Do we have the Stockholm hub up with the panelists?
Can you hear us? Hello.
Super, I see you over there. The 3 E's, I call you. Amazing. So we have Ebba from Nordea and Eloise from Credita de Kroll. How are you doing tonight?
Very good, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Super, I will
It's a
take on
pleasure
this.
to be here today.
Super, totally welcome to the panel. So today we have seen great talks about investments and finance. You know, we had our CFO from Ericsson, Carl Melander, on earlier talking with investors, and what we're going to talk about today is another type of green investments. So that's why I have these 2 awesome ladies with me today. So Eloise, can you maybe start to talk about why we will talk about a revolving credit facility and what that means?
Yes, of course. So basically, a revolving credit facility is a bank financial product, which is basically a credit line, which is provided by the main relationships banks of the company, and which can be drawn at any time during the life of the facility. One of the specificity of such a financing instrument is that it can be drawn once, then repaid, and then withdrawn again. And the purpose of such financing is generally to support the liquidity needs of the company, and it can also be used to finance general corporate purposes, such as, for instance, working capital needs, or in sometimes CapEx needs also.
Much, Eloise. Thank you so much. So going to that, what Ericsson did was creating the sustainability-linked RCF. So maybe, Ebba, you can talk about what it is and also the amount that Ericsson actually invested in this.
Of course, yeah. So a sustainability-linked RCF is exactly what Eloise just said. It's an RCF, but it's has a sustainability-linked feature to it. So a sustainability-linked feature is really not dependent on what type of debt we have underlying this solution, but instead it's a sustainable format that we can use in different debt formats. And the sustainability linkage is actually that you take an organization's sustainability KPIs and connect it to your debt. So these sustainability KPIs, if you achieve the KPIs, then that would lead to a margin discount. And if you would fail the KPIs, then that would lead to a margin increase. And exactly as you said, Emily, Ericsson actually recently signed a $2 billion sustainability-linked RCF. And Nordea, together with also Crédit Agricole CIB, was part of the 18 banks that provided this debt. So Emily, please go ahead and let us know what the KPIs were that you used and how that process went for you selecting the KPIs.
Thank you so much, Ebba. I think 18 banks, it's insane, right? Anyway, it's a lot of money, especially for me coming from the climate action side. So we were thrilled when Treasury and our CFO started to talk about linking our green solutions to, especially now climate target as we chose, but sustainability-linked loans. And what we wanted to create when we chose the KPIs was to have something that you need to measure it. You need to also have yearly targets. So that was one of the criteria we had when we were setting the targets for the RCF, and it was actually quite a long discussion. We didn't want to set up new targets for the RCF per se. We wanted to have the action, but also get the RCF to help us achieve our targets. And then it came to climate action, and also the reason why we take this up today, because we feel as a company that we need to follow science and we need to create action within the company, but also externally. And by linking that to climate targets, we can actually create this awareness. So we chose 2 KPIs to start with the RCF. Firstly, as Carl Melander earlier talked about, our carbon neutrality target of going carbon neutral in our own operations, so meaning our fleet vehicles and facility emissions, going toward net zero emissions by 2030, and we are going to do that with reductions. Maybe some small of the emission can be offsetted through permanent carbon removals, but that is will not be a part of the RCF. And that's really important to stress that it's the reduction of this KPI that will be measured and also hopefully reduce the margin when we are achieving our targets according to the trajectory. The second KPI is within our supply chain action. We have actually talked about this today, launching a supplier engagement guide with our 1.5 degree supply chain leaders. Within Ericsson's sourcing target, we have focusing on 350 suppliers, standing for over 90% of the whole Ericsson supply chain emissions. We want them to set 1.5 degree targets, that meaning halving emissions by 2030 for the whole value chain, for their own operations, sorry. And this is crucial, not just letting them put their own reduction that Ericsson enforce on them, but let them set their own 1.5 degree targets and choose where to act. And we're actually, of these 350 suppliers, we are actually really on a good way, almost reaching 100 now. So we're really happy of having that within the RCF. And we will, within the RCF, actually update the climate target because we know that we are evolving and hopefully we can go faster. And then the RCF can also be updated to maybe even include one more KPI of our climate. So enough about that. This is one way of green financing. And beforehand in the panel where Carl Melander, our CFO from Ericsson, discussed with investors, we talked about other green financial solutions within the portfolio. So I was thinking if maybe you can also talk about that, and maybe Louise can go first.
Yes, of course, Emily. As you said, there are lots of financing solutions. At Crédit Agricole CIB, we've been actively participating in the development and in the diversification of the sustainable finance market. As our team has been created in 2009, so it's been 12 years that we worked on that topic, and we've worked on lots of transactions all over the world. So in terms of solutions, there is an extended range of sustainable finance solution. First, I would say in terms of financial instrument, sustainable finance can be applied to any financial instruments. So it all started on the bond and on the loan market, but we can now expand it to any financial product, such as, for instance, securitization program, swaps, guarantees, trade finance or project finance, and so on. So that's the first part. Second part concerns the approach and the approach of sustainable finance that we can propose. So we just discussed the first one with EBA, which is a sustainability linked approach, so basically a KPI-based financing. Such financing are generally used for general corporate purposes, and there is another approach, which is the use of proceed financing. It has been historically the main driver of the sustainable finance market, mainly through the development of the green bond market. And the basis of such green financing is that the proceeds of the financing are earmarked to green eligible projects which have a clear environmental benefits. So this was the first instrument on this market. Then we've seen the emergence also of the social bond market and social financing, where the proceeds of such financing are earmarked to projects which have a clear social benefits, and we can also do a mix of both instruments. So basically, there are lots of ways to talk about sustainable finance. Both approaches that we just described can coexist together, and it makes a lot of sense for companies to have both within their funding strategy, as it allows them to align their financing strategy with their main sustainability commitment. Don't know, Eba, maybe you want to add something on that topic?
I completely agree with you, and I think what you mentioned now, like this more platform thinking maybe, that you can actually connect these maybe if we call the use of proceeds format more of an activities-based format where you can actually invest in something that is already green or social. And then we have this sustainability-linked format where you need to select these material and ambitious KPIs for the overall organization that can actually drive some kind of transition. So these two formats works really great together for companies. So I agree with you.
So there are a lot of potential solutions here and a lot of green finance. Just for the consumer market, like, do we also have something for that?
You mean a type of debt, or?
No, I was just thinking about. I'm just going. For example, housing loans, for example, that's also something that can be involved.
Yes, of course.
Exactly. Yeah. So we also seeing it on a different, end of the spectrum as well, not only companies. So it's really, it's really a wide variety, and I think in Sweden, where we are, but we're seeing that more and more, and I think that's really interesting that, for example, my friends as well, like, are getting those housing loan, and it's something that, is also coming on a common tongue of speaking. So really great, and it's amazing to hear the impact actually finance can do, and I think that's really important now when we talk. We are at the COP and we have the Finance Day, and we know we have a lot of pledges about funding now, but we also need to see the action.
No, that's a very, very good point also with how we can bring in also the consumer market into these debt solutions and offer green mortgage loans for consumers with energy efficient buildings, for example. So of course, that is also a large part of the market.
That's great. Can we do more to scale and create more impact?
We can always do more. No, but I think that this type of events, of course, is really good to actually increase awareness of this type of debt solutions. Not all organizations or corporates might actually know that they exist. So also companies leading by examples, as with the case of Ericsson, just showcasing what you did here and the process. I think that is great for increasing awareness. But then it's very much up to the banks to also advise on these topics and bring clarity to the different formats that are available in the market, and make sure to bring it up with all clients that we have, to also show the availability of the formats, but also give them a chance to actually make a transition if they want to, or show investors, as in the case of bonds, for example, where they can actually shift their financing toward more sustainable solutions.
Thank you so much, Ebba. I've also been told. Yeah.
Yes,
maybe you want to add something.
Yeah, yes, I'm just going to add that we are clearly on a booming market in sustainable finance, and the volumes have been strongly increasing since the beginning, and it has been accelerating quite a lot over the past two years. Maybe to illustrate that, I'll give you a few figures. For instance, on the European loan market, we at the beginning of 2021, in the second quarter, we've seen more than half of the RCF, so revolving credit facility, which have been refinanced, which are sustainability linked, and on the bond market, on the European bond market also, more than 20% of new issuance are either green, social, or sustainability linked. So that's clearly the sign that the sustainable finance market is increasing quite a lot. And maybe to conclude on that topic, it is expanding for sure. The market and the regulation are also consistently evolving, and for sure it's going to drive further impact and further innovation on the market going forward.
If I just can add something here, I think one of the previous speakers that we had here today also mentioned the word greenwashing, and that is of course something that we also need to make sure that organizations are not afraid of these formats, and that we make sure that these products actually works as they should, and would not pose any risks of greenwashing. So here we have, this market is not regulated, but we have principles guiding us in this market. So here it's of course very important that we follow these principles and are part of driving the market and avoid any risks of being accused of greenwashing.
I think that's a really good final word, and we should not greenwash, and we should also have action right now. I thank you so much, Eloise and Ebba, for coming with me, and say hi to Katarina again. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Emily. Now I know why.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Use this.
So let's move on to the next panel. We have 3 experts lined up for you. The first one is Thomas Bergen. He's founder of Hope Now and Get Abstract. And Thomas has founded the Hope Now Foundation and is calling on entrepreneurs around the world to support its mission. And this is to enforce carbon fees and also carbon dividends in most parts of the world, starting, of course, with the leading nations. Great to see you. I see you here, that you're with us on Zoom, Thomas. Wonderful. And
glad you have me here.
Yes, great. And the next speaker is Nick Beglinger. He's co-founder and CEO of CleanTech21 Foundation. And Nick is a Swiss economist and also activist with a mission to accelerate technological and regulatory innovation that addresses the climate and also the biodiversity crisis. And with me here in Glasgow, I'm very happy to have Kathy Orlando. And Kathy is Director of Programs at Citizens Climate International. And this is a program that creates the framework to empower volunteers to build political will for evidence-based carbon pricing. And you work in 75 countries worldwide, so it's very impressive. I'd also like to invite Ingmar Rentzog with us here on stage for this panel. So I'd like to start with you, Kathy. You started Climate Citizens Lobby in Canada, and this was the first international chapter, and it was already in 2017, and in the district of Sudbury, Canada. For those of you that are not familiar with this fantastic achievement, please tell us, what did you achieve in Sudbury?
Okay.
You're good with that.
Oh,
one.
yes, that's right. Okay, so I began the first international chapter outside of the USA of Citizens Climate Lobby in 2010 in Sudbury. And literally within a month, we had chapters in Toronto and another city in Northern Ontario. And between 2010 and 2017, we grew our organization. By 2015, we were in 80 of 332 constituencies in Canada, building political will for carbon pricing. By that point, we had lobbied our parliamentarians about 600 times. In 2015, the government changed, and we got a much more carbon pricing friendly government, with the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, being that Prime Minister. So for 2 years, the Canadian government consulted the people of Canada and businesses and industry in what was called the Pan-Canadian Framework on Climate Change and Clean Growth. Our volunteers in that time, again, lobbied about 350 times. They're parliamentarians. And in 2017, the Canadian government announced that it was going to put a gradually increasing fee on carbon pollution and give all the money back to the people for that price that was for the households. There's a separate carbon pricing system for industry, but much of the carbon price is under the households, and that's what we had been lobbying for literally that 7 years. That's precisely what we had been lobbying for. Obviously, a lot more details needed to be filled in, and we're continuing to fill that in. In 2019, they had an election, and 2/3 of Canadians voted for parties that had carbon pricing. And again, because we have a parliamentary system that required another election just 2 months ago, again, about 2/3 of Canadians voted for parties that have evidence-based policies in their systems. So what we've learned in Canada is that you can price carbon pollution and win an election. And it's very exciting.
It's a stellar example of really the stamina and also the power of the many. So Ingmar Rentzhog, we have highlighted this on previous broadcasts. And what effects do you think this has had that people have heard of the fantastic work that has been put in place in this part of Canada?
I think it's so important to have, great policy decisions doesn't work if they're not implemented. And it's kind of basic concept with cap and dividend. You take a carbon tax and you give the money to all people. But many people are skeptic, how is this going to work, etc. And since Canada implemented it, it's so easy to tell people it works. And as you said, you could win election on it. And I think that's a really, really big lesson here, because in Switzerland earlier this year, we had this big vote where the people, and it was not just the climate denialist people, it was also the climate aware people that it's not good enough. So they voted against a carbon tax. And I think the learning from that is that if you introduce something that is bad for most people, people will vote it down. But if you introduce something that creates more winners than losers, people will love it. But they need to know about it. So I really like this cap and dividend strategy, because that's perfectly in line with why I believe in it should be cheap and profitable to do the right thing, and very expensive to do the wrong thing.
Before I turn to the panelists that we have with us on Zoom, I'll just like to ask one more question to you, Kathy. Internationally now, what do you see in the wake of what you've done? I mean, what impact are you having in other countries? You work in 155 countries?
No, only 75.
75! 155 was another digit that flew into my head, sorry.
Okay, so for example, just last week, our volunteers in Nigeria held their very first education and lobby day. And they went to their capital, parliamentarians, and they met with several parliamentarians, and they've been invited back, and all to discuss enacting a Canadian-like carbon pricing policy. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Nigeria, it has over 200 million people, it has an oil economy, and it has an economy the size of Russia. So if Nigeria moves on carbon pricing on the continent, this is huge. It'll start to really shift things. So kudos to our volunteers in Nigeria doing this work. Around the world, our volunteers are at the European Union lobbying for some sort of rebate back to the people, and just overall just having a socially just transition as we shift away from fossil fuels, because that is coming.
Thank you very much, Kathy. I'm now turning to Thomas. You are convinced that the most important change needed to stop climate change is indeed the introduction of price on carbon. And of course, you're not alone in thinking this. Please elaborate on your specific view on this.
Just support what Kathy is saying, and Ingmar, it's just real that a product that has no price will be overused in the markets we have right now, in the situation we have right now. And my point there is very easy. We need to introduce that, and what Kathy is doing with the Citizen Climate International, I think is really a good approach. What I try to do is bring together worldwide entrepreneurs who say, guys, that's really relevant. We need that now. We need to act now, and we support that idea. And if necessary, we make that as well happen through our power that we have. And that's what I try to bring together at Hope Now, 5,000 entrepreneurs worldwide who really support that idea. And together with organizations like Kathy's and We Do Not Have Time, I'm sure we can then move the needle much faster.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And Nick, you have actively been promoting carbon pricing for, 10 plus years. Tell us briefly about your work, please, and why you're still pushing on, and what you see, if you see light at the tunnel.
Okay, thanks a lot.
the end of
Happy
the
to be here. Well, I think, on the third day of COP, it's always easy to see light at the end of the tunnel because there's so many announcements and so many great things being said that would start to be implemented. I think in all of this, one has to really bear in mind that in order for us to reach the 1.5 C target, stay below that warming target, we have to move all the market. And what Kathy is doing and Thomas is promoting is about that. It's about moving all the market because it's about giving a price to emissions that, as Thomas said, don't have a price yet, but urgently need a price for the economy to recognize that price and factor it in. And not just factor it in a new project that has been announced at COP today, but factor it in every single decision, every single investor, every single entrepreneur, every single consumer makes on a daily basis. Only then we will reach the market to act on climate, to include the costs that come with emissions and that need to be included if we want to make the right decisions in the market. So that's why this is a hugely important topic that unfortunately is not gaining enough focus yet on the international level and needs organizations such as Kathy's and organizations such as now Thomas in order to push this forward. Our foundation is active at this intersection between business, technology, and regulation, as you said at the beginning. And this is therefore one of our projects to make this type of pricing happen. Not just speak about the need for carbon pricing or better emission pricing, because all emissions need to be included, not just carbon. Not just speak about it and not just say that it's important, but actually work out specific solutions in specific countries that can be implemented one after the other and then linked together in order to balance them out, because the prices will not be the same everywhere. They need to be balanced. So our foundation runs a project that is called the International Climate Income Alliance that tries to bring awareness to governments that there is this great way to price emissions, not just any way, but this specifically great way, because it's simple, because it's fair, and because it's effective. It can be set such that it actually will have an effect in the market.
Thank you very much, Nick. Comments from Kathy and Ingmar on Thomas's and Nick's reflections, please.
Yeah, it's time. It's ridiculous that polluters don't pay. And as well, we need our...
They don't pay, they're getting paid.
Yeah, you're right. They're getting paid on top of it. Like, it's ridiculous. Our the word government, it comes from the French word gouverner, or the Latin word gouverneur as well, which means to steer. And we need our governments to steer our economies in the right direction. And this price on carbon will do that. And we need policies that will protect us, the people, civilization, from those of us who act on their worst instincts and just not care about other people. So a price on pollution makes the polluters pay, and the work of people such as Nick and Thomas and many people, we don't have time, are so important to just keep this going, that a price on carbon pollution is probably and I say this humbly, I'm Canadian, probably the single most effective policy we have to cut emissions. And we need it, and it's coming.
So Kathy, you've been around today, Finance Day here, you've been present at the COP. What are you picking up? I mean, there's a lot of promises flying around the air, but when it comes to the pricing of carbon, what is your gut feeling?
Oh, I got 3 big gut feelings in the last 24 hours. First of all, my Prime Minister is calling for a global price on carbon. That was said out loud here at COP, so kudos to Prime Minister Trudeau. Today, the Turkish pavilion and the Russian pavilion both had carbon pricing discussions. That's because the CBAMs are coming. A global price on carbon is coming because polluters must pay. And then lastly, there still needs to be more education. People still need to ask it and need to come to carbon pricing their way. So we have to listen as people who are advocates for carbon pricing, slow down, and listen. Why are people pushing against it? And then help. So that's my last thing. So very hopeful, but those of us who are cheering it on, we got to slow down a little.
Thank you. We'll remember the yellow vests, so we have to be cautious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Ingmar.
Yeah, I would like to take the opportunity to actually explain carbon pricing a little bit, because I think we are maybe rushing it for many of our viewers here. Carbon pricing is about making the polluters pay. It shouldn't be free to pollute the atmosphere. It should cost a lot of money, so the alternatives will be better, cheaper, more profitable. But the thing with the Canada policy is that it's not just about making the polluters pay. It's also about giving money back to the people. So it's not a tax where the government take the money and they spend it on a lot of things you maybe don't like to spend it on. Instead, they take the money and they just give it back to the people. So that this will also make it an encouragement, because people will receive money. And what they could do with this money is they can buy the green solutions. So it will actually work in two ways.
It's a catalyst.
It will make it expensive to pollute, and you will have a lot of money to invest in the green solution and buy the green solutions. So that is what I think is so brilliant with this, and I think we need to push that because people don't know about this.
Thank you for pointing it out a bit.
I could just tell, we had this education for all the Swedish parliamentarians, and totally new information for them.
Yes, I was there, and it was mind-boggling that they really didn't know what we were talking about initially. So I turn to Thomas and Nick now. Let's start with Thomas. What are your hope when it comes to this, the pricing of carbon, the outcome here, the push at the COP?
Yeah. First of all, I would like to highlight a point. Yes, it's important that polluters will pay. But for me, it's even more important that we create a market that's so huge that every young startup entrepreneur will just think about how I will reduce carbon emissions, because that will make me rich. I want to have the richest person on earth, the man or woman who really solves that problem. That's what's needed now.
That's a great vision. Yeah, it's wonderful.
And that happens when we have a CO2 price. That immediately happens from one day to the other. Thousands of young engineers, thousands of young entrepreneurs with all their energy will try to solve that problem. And that's needed because we do not yet have the solutions to achieve the targets that we are talking about by 2050.
Thank you so much for really spelling it out. How about you, Thomas?
Nick.
You mean,
Nick. It's getting late in the broadcast. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sympathy for that. No, I mean, I agree with that. It's something that has to happen. I think, to add value to viewers, and maybe I would like to add a few points on what's new and different now. I think we have innovation in the regulatory space. We have innovation in technology that can make these solutions better. So maybe if I point that out at the end. So maybe in terms of technology, before it was mentioned, that this is a particular way of pricing emissions, and that is so great because the money gets returned to the people. The key thing here is to always remember it gets returned in equal shares. That means that you actually have a progressive income effect of this instrument, meaning that about 60% of all the households in a particular country, and this works for most Western economies, for sure, numbers are being assembled for developing countries, but it's actually more skewed in developing countries even. So what it means is that 60% actually have more money in their pocket because of this instrument. So it's the exact opposite of a carbon tax, or the example we had with the Gilets jaunes in France, where the government wanted to do the right thing, but the people calculated and came to the conclusion that at the end of the month, when they have to pay the bills, they don't have enough money. If the government keeps the money it puts on emissions, the price it puts on emissions, they don't have enough money. And that was the Gilets jaunes problem, and the government had to retreat. It was a solution that wasn't successful because the people didn't accept it. And the Swiss example was exactly the same. It was not accepted that the government would deal with it in this way. So it's really important to emphasize that if we design such an instrument right, if the money is being put back to the people, then those obstacles that many politicians still see today, they vanish, because then all of a sudden, most of the voters will actually benefit from the instrument. And that will make it politically feasible and therefore an implemented solution and not just talk. My last point would be on trade and technology. When we speak about emission pricing, and I think particularly at this COP, we have a few discussions that go in this direction already. The meeting at the Russian pavilion that was mentioned before was an example of this today, because there was also Ursula von der Leyen, who has explained that the EU, who is doing emission pricing, wants to protect its firms, and therefore they want to price at the border. It was mentioned before, CBAM,
yes.
Meaning pricing at the border, having a carbon border adjustment mechanism. And that means that all of a sudden now, and that's, I think, is really important to remember with this pricing instrument, all of a sudden we have a way to enforce climate policy. If there is a country where emissions are not priced that wants to import into the EU, at the border, that pricing will be done by the EU, meaning that it is to the disadvantage of the country that doesn't price and wants to import into the EU. So we have, for the first time really, in the Paris type framework, a way to actually enforce climate policy. If we price at the border, we can enforce climate policy. So that's really key. And now, where does technology come in? My very last point. Technology is also helping us a lot. First, in this border adjustment issue, that's very similar to VAT, where over the years we've developed an information technology and are continuing to develop better solutions with sensors and things that makes it feasible to actually adjust at the border, to know the carbon content of a product that comes up a value chain, where the information of how much emission is in that product is passed through the value chain, and therefore can be adjusted at the border in the right way. And another important way on how technology can be used is if the government needs to send money back to the people, that's also a logistical task. And with modern technology, we could return that money in an electronic way, which makes it possible not to just give money once a year, for example, but actually give money back to the people every month, meaning that it helps them to cover their bills every month, which makes the whole instrument, this type of emission pricing instrument, even more fair and therefore just, how we want it in order to be effective and also in order to be accepted by the people.
Thank you so much. We are now turning to see if we have any questions from two of our hubs. And I'd like to see if we can connect with Stockholm for a question or a reflection. And after that, a quick note from Washington, D.C. before we sum up and run up this broadcast. Yes, hello, I see you are with us, Sarah Shaban in Stockholm.
Hi,
so do you have a comment or a question?
For this great reflection on carbon pricing. And I think, as Nick just pointed out, talking about the Gilets jaunes and then the Swiss referendum, yes, political leaders can take decisions, but if they don't have the support from their people and the individuals, it's not going to go anywhere. And I think what politicians and leaders need to do is first to educate themselves, as you pointed out, on the carbon pricing question, but also so they can design the best way possible, and then learn how to communicate the best way about it and actually show that this money is going to go back to the community. Otherwise, yes, we're very hopeful looking at Canada, for example, but yeah, I think we need the support from the individuals to actually go forward. And that's my reflection on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And this, of course, communication is key in this, in making this possible, making this happen. Shutta, hello again. What are your reflections, or do you have any questions from Washington?
Yes, I just wanted to point out, I loved how Nick put this. It really comes down to how we talk about carbon pricing. If we actually describe it and implement it as dividends back to the public, now we're talking about support. It really comes down to how we frame this pricing issue. And so this is something that unfortunately wasn't successful in being part of that Build Back Better agenda that's currently in Congress right here in Washington, D.C. The language of making polluters pay didn't make it into this bill, despite how important this is. And we've heard from all the panelists very passionately that it's absolutely ridiculous that polluters aren't paying. Even the political, those who identify as libertarian in the United States, who are seen as anti-government, still support this concept that polluters must pay. So we're getting the language wrong here. It's not that it's a price or a tax. It's on carbon. It's that it's a dividend and it's a give back and it's a positive spending opportunity in the right direction for the citizens of any country that is going to implement a price on carbon. So I just wanted to add that in, and hopefully America follows suit sooner than later and we get that price on carbon.
Thank you very much, Jutta in Washington, and thank you very much, Sarah in Stockholm. And thank you very much for, it's tired, late in the broadcast. Thank you so much, Kathy Orlando, for doing this pulling of this question and also the push that you constantly do on a global level. It's admirable, really, and keep up the fantastic work. And also Nick and Thomas, keep at it. We'll get there eventually, right? Thank you so much for joining this panel. Thank you. Thank you, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And now, it's getting late, as I said. We are summing up this fantastic day on finance, and I'd like to ask Mats Pellbeck-Sharp to join me on stage for some final remarks on what we've talked about here today. Mats Pellbeck-Sharp, Head of Sustainability from Ericsson. I'd like to start with you, Mats. Main takeaways.
Well, to me, I think so many good things have been said, and probably one of the key takeaways is really about this subsidies to fossil fuels, that it's not going down, it's staying there. I may surprise you by saying that, yes, we know it's extremely bad, but there is also something good. And that is the surprise, right?
Yes.
The good thing is that the subsidies are superseding the profits of the companies. So when you stop the subsidies, the bottom will go out. And nobody wants to sit with those investments. So it is a stranded asset. So
it's a ticking bomb.
It's a
for the
ticking bomb.
investor.
Yeah, exactly. Because as soon as you sort of have less money in the market than the profit, so there is no money in that market without the subsidies. And that's like, I mean, in the 70s in Sweden, we built ships and we put them out there sort of one after one because we thought we could keep still sort of shipbuilding in Sweden. We couldn't. We closed it down. It was a total loss. And that's where that is going. So that is sort of my take on the subsidies. It's extremely bad. We have to stop it, but when it stops, the bottom will fall. So I think that's the good part about it. So it will go fast. So people should be scared about having oil assets in their portfolio. So that's the first thing. The second thing, we saw Carl Melander, and I think it was a brilliant twist from. I hoped it would have been my idea, but in fact it was the team's idea to sort of turn it around. To sort of have the investee ask the investors the question instead of the other way around. They always ask us as sort of the company the questions. Now we had the chance to sort of ask them, why don't you do like that and what is happening there? So I think that was super interesting. Four things I had. The third thing was really, we heard in the panel that the revolving credits now linked to sustainability in Europe is over 50%. So green loans are moving over to the majority of the loans happening. And then, of course, the last thing is really that mobile money is bringing Global South out of poverty and creating resilience towards climate threats and the impacts of climate. So I think those were my key four things of today.
Thank you for being so hopeful. And we need this. Ingmar Rentzhog.
I totally agree. I couldn't say it better. And actually this day I mean, my background is actually before I found that We Don't Have Time, I was working in the finance industry. I was also working on communicating, so the Chatta is absolutely right. We need to frame things like something that is good for the people, not something that costs people. I mean, 60% of the people will have more money.
She's a doctor in behavioral science, so she knows what she's talking about.
So that's a no-brainer. We should do it. Everyone wants a dividend, free dividend for you, for the people. What I see today is a lot of hope, and I think we have the solution here, because money is everything on how to govern the whole human race. People do what money tell them to do. Today it's something bad. You get rich if you're destroying the planet. But if we implement what we have discussed here today, we could start with turning off this. Just turn it off. I don't want to see that. It didn't work. Yeah, it worked, maybe. Yes, it worked. Now it's off. We have ended it. That's the start. That will move everything. Investors, people will get rich that is investing in the green, and people will be really scared of the oil investment, etc. Next step, we need to implement this dividend, the carbon dividend. And we will have climate justice, because we will give people back to the people that wants it. Most people will be winners. If you have that two things in place, I think we have the Paris Agreement kind of done deal. We also need a lot of complicated stuff, because we are a global world and not one leader, so we need border adjustment, and we need a lot of details in this. Yes. But the concept, take away the subsidies and introduce this dividend. And we have the technology. Companies like Ericsson have the technology. We just need to implement it and finance it more. That's my key takeaway. And another positive thing is that I talked with our previous speaker here. They are very well known into the subject of subsidies and other stuff. And I have a feeling that we will see that counter be discussed on this climate meeting at COP26, and that's a big step. And on COP27, I hope we will discuss this dividend also.
Excellent. So money makes the world go round, and money might make the world survive if they're directed in the right. Well, it goes in the right direction. Well, thank you so much, Mats Pellback-Sharp and Ingmar Rentzhog, and all of you watching, the team behind the scenes, all speakers. It's been a fantastic day and lots of hope. And we'll be back tomorrow. And tomorrow we're going to talk about energy and also about transport. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Listen, there's a distant sound closer, soon it's all around. Heal me, time is running out. Come on, tell them what it's all about. We're running out of time, we're running out of air. We gotta keep it clean, show me that you care. Wherever you are, you got to wake up. United as a nation. Time to wait, there's a world to say. Right or